Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv. Wolok, my partner in crime as always, Vasili Gianarakos, my friend. How you doing?
I'm doing well. It might as well be trade deadline day today, at least for the
Yeah.
Flyers, because seems like they're making all their moves on a Wednesday here, 2 days before the trade deadline. I mean, we'll see what happens on the Friday. Maybe there's more moves to be made, obviously, but I'm doing well, and there's really just a lot to break down in terms of Flyers news, and it's actually hilarious because we were scheduled to record this yesterday, and now when we were talking offline, we were thinking to ourselves, hey, it's almost a blessing in disguise that never happened, so we can break all the news down. But I'm excited for this one. How you doing, Yariv?
Yeah, man. No, I think you nailed it because that would have sucked, right? We would have released the episode,
Yeah.
and then immediately all this news broke, and we're like, damn it! Now we gotta wait till Friday to record and whatever. No, this worked out well. And we finally got some answers on stuff that we needed to know, and we'll talk about other teams as well. We'll do like a full trade deadline. We'll start off with that stuff. Then we'll talk about like the Flyers, like the nitty gritty of the Flyers, and then we'll end with a little bit of prospect updates at the end there. So let's get into it. So before we get started, just want to remind everybody, please like, subscribe, help us with sharing. It's always a humongous help. Follow us on iTunes and Spotify. Give us a rating that's there as well. Hit the notification bell on YouTube for notifications of when we release the episodes. All of that is tremendously helpful. Also, a shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. Make sure to get yourself a cheesesteak. They are available on DoorDash. And also, shout out to Public Summit Adjusters, 215-752-0560 for all your adjustment needs. Okay, let's get into it. So we had kind of this trade deadline date looming over us. It's still here. The date still looms, but it does kind of feel like this was the straw that broke the camel's back today. We're recording this on the Wednesday, March the 6th. The trade deadline is at, I believe, 3 p.m. on Friday, the 8th. So this is in advance of the deadline, but it feels like the trade deadline was today to some degree, though there are some large trades still looming around the league. But the big ones for the Flyers, the two big names that were out there, obviously, were Sean Walker and Nick Seeler, both pending UFAs, and we finally got some updates. So Sean Walker, as of now, is a member of the Colorado Avalanche. The Philadelphia Flyers have acquired Ryan Johansson, former 4th overall pick, former player under John Tortorella, played for the Columbus Blue Jackets, for the Nashville Predators, and then recently the Colorado Avalanche. They also received a first top 10 protected in 2025, and they also sent a 5th-round pick to Colorado along with Walker in exchange for Johansson in that first. We'll go into Walker first, and then we'll talk about Nick Seeler after that. But this was obviously a humongous trade as far as kind of the impact on the perception of the team. Again, Vasily, I'll let you talk and state your opinion, but I'll state mine here. I am still not under the disillusion that this trade like makes or breaks the franchise. I think they picked up a really nice asset in a 1st-round pick, especially in 2025, which is rumored to be a stronger draft than the 2024 draft. I think from what I understand that was definitely part of what was a big motivational factor for the Flyers, just to get a pick next year, especially considering that they already have 2 this year. And to have kind of the, 2 this year and then 2 next year again, kind of load up, kind of speed the process up. So I do think it was a really nice pickup. The caveat, also, I think it was 25% retained on the Sean Walker trade on his contract. Not a big deal there. The Flyers were probably willing to retain up to 50% there. So Walker's, salary cap, for Colorado should be just under $2 million at that point. So they can nicely squeeze him under the cap, let him play a 3rd-line role. The Flyers bring on not just that first, but also Ryan Johansson. He has already been placed on waivers. Actually, the news about him being on waivers broke before the trade, which was really funny, is that the waiver announcement came out before the actual news of the trade broke. So we kind of knew something was up between the Flyers and Colorado. This is a really interesting situation overall. The Flyers got an asset that they obviously covet in that first round pick. It's going to be a late first round pick, but again, it's an asset. It allows for flexibility, but they do bring on a player who has 2 years remaining at $4 million a year. And look, these are our thoughts. There's going to be some more time. It's going to reveal things. I'm sure Danny Briere is going to make some kind of announcement. Maybe it'll be after the trade deadline. Uh, this is, not speaking too much for Vasili. I'll have his take, but to our understanding, the reason why you put Ryan Johansson on waivers immediately afterwards, Flyers didn't necessarily need another forward, right? It's $4 million for the next 2 years. This is a guy that they didn't necessarily covet, right? So they're going to throw him on waivers, see if anybody bites on him. I'm hearing people say that they think he's going to go play for the Phantoms. Look, I think that's highly unlikely. The guy, even now, 13 goals in the year, that would put him tied for fifth on the team with Cam Atkinson, 23 points, -6. This is not that bad. He's playing 13, just under 14 minutes a night. This is a guy the Flyers could easily move into the rotation, maybe even something that they could help with the power play. His relationship, and I saw Bill Meltzer tweet this out, with Tortorella on the surface level, they say that they have nothing against each other personally, that it was just like a hockey decision made back in the day. But again, this is one of those things I talked about where John Tortorella calls out a player. He's almost never wrong. And that's why I brought up the Cutter Gauthier stuff. Is like guys who go in with these attitudes like they are bigger than the game doesn't usually work out for them. I think Ryan Johansson probably has been humbled quite a bit over the years. So I think there's an opportunity to mend here. And I think the Flyers were really looking to rehab the player. In their mind, they have a contract that they could potentially rehab, just like Sean Walker, just like they thought they could do with Peterson. Bring him in, try to get the most out of him, and potentially maybe move him next year for an asset and retain up to
Yeah.
50% of his contract. All right, I said a lot there. Vasili, please add your thoughts.
Yeah, well, just to add on to your final point there before I kind of dive into it fully is
Sure.
look at a Sean Monahan with Montreal, right? They acquired
Great
him. They
example.
thought he was, cooked, and they ended up getting a first round pick for him after he kind of, turned out to be able to produce offensively once again for the Habs. So you never know
Great
what's going to
point.
happen with Johansson there. So that's more of a wait and see situation. In terms of the Walker trade, obviously to get the first round pick, I think that's the main crux of the trade.
Yeah.
So that's what, Briere and staff are looking to really acquire. That was the price that they ultimately set. I think main factor with it all though is you probably don't pry that first round pick out of Colorado unless you're taking back that Johansson contract. If not, that compensation draft pick wise might end up being a second, even third round pick potentially, like who knows. But because you take that extra contract back in Johansson, that obviously Colorado wants to rid of, because they end up making another trade where Bowen Byram, brings them Casey Middlestad, which obviously is an upgrade for them at center. So it looks like that's what they were trying to do, right? Swap Johansson for Middlestad there. So they kind of needed Johansson to be on the move in order to do that. So obviously that's the caveat for the Flyers, right? Like Johansson's having an underwhelming season. He's definitely not playing the best he has in his career, that's for certain, or else Colorado's not going to move him. So that's what you kind of are dealing with as the Flyers, to bring a guy like Johansson in and also acquire that first round pick. It is top 10 protected. For some reason Colorado were to finish and in the bottom of the league and it becomes a top 10 pick, it's going to go and slide to 2026. I would not expect that to happen. Looking at Colorado and just, how good that their team has been, moving forward essentially. But it's definitely a trade where you have Sean Walker, who's an expiring contract. And if you're the Flyers, there's no guarantee you're going to sign him, obviously. I mean, they've been in contract extensions. There was rumors that he wanted over $5 million, in 5 years of term and things like that. So I can understand where with the Flyers and just their prospect pipelines in terms of defensemen, and also that they have other defensemen locked up to lengthy deals like Erasmus Ristolainen. You don't want to pigeonhole yourself into another 5 year deal with an aging defenseman, for $5 million plus, because who knows if he'll be able to get out from under that, especially with Walker kind of having a career season, right? Like it's going to it looks like it will be as long as he continues his play on Colorado, which I would assume, just based on their defense core, that he's going to have his best season in points ever. Um, so it's a career year effectively for him. One thing I did want to mention is if you look at the full Ivan Provorov trade now, because Sean Walker was a part of that Ivan Provorov trade. This is essentially what you're receiving, right? You're getting Oliver Bonk, which was LA's 2023 first. You're getting Colorado's 2025 first. You're getting Carson Bjarnason, which was LA's 2024 second. You're getting Columbus's second in 2024 or 2025. You're getting a Helge Grans, and you're getting cap dumps in Cal Peterson and Ryan Johansson. And that's essentially for Ivan Provorov and Sean Walker combined. So for those two players, it's a pretty nice return, obviously. The caveat to both is, though, you have cap dumps in Peterson and Johansson.
Like
And people did think
almost
that Sean
$9.5 million.
yeah, exactly. Almost $9.5 million, which is not ideal, but they're looking at the assets as being the main
They're
factor.
weaponizing their
The
cap
cap
space.
space. Yeah. And I mean, one thing to note, right, is people thought Sean Walker was a throw in before the season. They thought he was done. And obviously they were able to
We
turn him
did
into a
not.
first round pick. Yeah. So, I mean,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but you especially, if I remember correctly, in the offseason were like, I don't know, man. Like, I feel like there's something
well,
there
I
with
watched him play a bunch in LA when they
right.
made the playoffs, and like he looked good. So I'm like, I don't know why everybody thinks he stinks, but yeah. So that was my perspective on it then. And who knows what's going to happen with Johansson? Obviously, like he could end up being a cap dump. There's been people reporting on Twitter that per sources, if he clears waivers, he's going right to the Phantoms. Who knows? Because, it's that time of year where not everything might be correct until it actually occurs, right? So that's what I would say to caveat. We'll see what happens with Johansson. My thought process is you're putting him on waivers, firstly, because you want somebody to claim him, where,
Yeah.
the center market's thin right now. It's totally a possibility. I had another thought too that we talked about before the show that maybe the Flyers try to flip Johansson on Friday. Maybe, they might not be able to do it at that 4 million hit, but maybe they can retain some money. I'm not exactly sure on the cap ramifications on if you could retain again, because Nashville already retained 4 million, but I'm almost pretty sure that they can do it since it would be a different team.
Yeah.
So we'll
I
see
think
if
so
that's
too.
we'll see if that's possible. But if not, I mean, you never know, right? Like if you don't trade him at the deadline, maybe you could trade him down the line in the summer, when things kind of open up for teams and maybe there's a better fit for him. But there's really no telling, I think, what's going to happen with Johansson. It's more of a wait and see. But I also don't think that he would be like the worst player on this Flyers roster if he's going to play. I think he would be considerably better than a few players, and he might be able to help you, like you were stating, in the faceoff dot. He has scored 13 goals this season. He might be able to, help you in a stretch run where the team's getting younger, by trading a guy like Walker. And that's subtracted from their defense really considerably here, especially with the injuries at play. But I think overall, the outlook that I take is now that you've acquired that extra first round pick, you have 4 first round picks coming up in the 2024 draft and 2025 draft combined. With all those picks, do the Flyers make them all, or do they kind of use those assets to try to upgrade the roster in the summer? I mean, time will tell, but I think that's the whole point of gathering all of these assets in terms of draft capital, because it does give you the flexibility if somebody does become available that you can weaponize them and potentially acquire maybe somebody that that could really help your roster, like in terms of a center or even another defenseman. There was another rumor I'll throw out before we kind of switch gears here, that with the Walker trade, depending on the return, maybe Jacob Chychrun was in play from the Senators. Kevin Kurz of The Athletic essentially said that that rumor was bogus. But then you have NHL Rumors Daily, who's on Twitter all the time and has been right with multiple rumors over the years, saying that no, that means Briere's just checked in on that situation. It doesn't mean that it never happened. So you have conflicting reports, and like we want to say
Crazy
on
season.
yeah, exactly right. It's crazy season. It's rumor season. So what you see on Twitter and online right now, take it with a grain of salt, because there's no telling really what's going to happen. All these conversations are fluid, right? It's not just set in stone. These teams are talking as the hours go by and things are developing. So.
Sure. I do think the Jacob Chychrun thing on the surface level makes sense, as far as he is in that age range that he could be part of this squad. I mean, you could look at the way the Flyers are kind of amassed this like dead cap in a way, right? Like they have Cam Atkinson, who's not going to be here, beyond next year. You have, assuming, right, with Ryan Johansson, he will not be here beyond next year.
Peterson.
You have Cal Peterson will not be here beyond next year. Already you're looking at like $15 million. And then you look at the fact that they have the buyout money. They have Lindblom's buyout who comes off the books, which is not that much. It's under 700,000. They have D'Angelo comes off the books, and then they still have 1 year beyond that for Kevin Hayes. But again, you kind of look at that, how they're slowly amassing, assets, young assets, and taking on cap, but to a certain extent. And if they buy out, Johansson, that kind of extends that a little bit longer. I just don't know how eager they are to do it.
It's a 1.3 million buyout if they were going to do it.
Yeah, but like you also could just get rid of him,
you could
at
probably
the end of
trade
next
him,
right? Like depends what your plans are for next season. But like again, I think the Mitch Cobb situation kind of, looms around all that. So I really think the Flyers are kind of looking for that window to be, beyond at the very least beyond next season, right? So like you'll probably see a little bit more of these type of moves, but not anything like the Flyers not really adding any kind of significant piece. And if they are doing that, dollar wise, it's going to be to just kind of eat it in the very short term to amass more assets and then clean that cap out where they'll probably have an immense amount of cap space kind of all at once, which seems like that's kind of what they're building up for. I mean, even 15 million alone looks like a nice number, but you have to get Konechny signed. You'll have some other guys to get signed. So
people getting raises, right? So it takes a chunk out, but you still have a good amount that, hey,
and the cap will be up by like 8-9 million by then. Too.
Yeah, right. Like if you need to allocate that down the line potentially, I think that's what essentially they're doing, Yariv, and that's a really strong analysis where like you have this window of, okay, we have this dead cap for now for a couple seasons here, but then once we move past it, we're going to have like 15 million almost essentially that we could allocate to free agency or trying to spend, on a big UFA. And I think the timing with Mitchkov obviously is a factor too, right? Because they want to maximize the fact that he's on an entry level deal and what they can do with that, because you're obviously having a ton of savings with a guy of that talent, only making $925,000 a year. One last piece on Walker is the Flyers and Walker apparently have left the door open to revisit a contract in the summer if he makes it to free agency. They couldn't agree on term or AAV and tried to find a trade that worked for both. And that's per Brandon Summerman on Twitter. So he's a really nice guy, covers the Flyers. So who knows how, accurate that is, but I think that's something we always thought maybe could be a possibility. Like obviously Walker, fit well here. He seemed to like the team. So you never know what's going to happen in free agency if they really like him. And let's say he might not be able to get that 5 million he's kind of looking for. Maybe he circles back around to the Flyers. But.
Yeah, I think it all depends what happens with Ristolainen. I think a lot of this kind of dependent what happens with Ristolainen, because if the Flyers have had talks with players beyond the players available at the trade deadline. I think Ristolainen's been a topic of conversation for a while, and he's an off-season type of move. So, like, I wouldn't be surprised if other players get moved. Even a guy like Scott Lawton could be moved. I don't think they're jumping to move Scott Lawton.
But I think that's more off-season, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, like, there are still plenty of moves to be made. That's why I just don't blow up the trade deadline. Like, oh my God, you didn't get a first for Walker.
Well, it's a short-term view of a long-term approach, right?
Right.
Like there's no team builds a long-term approach for their organization at a trade deadline, right? It's done over multiple, off seasons, a trade deadline. Obviously there's a plan in place. We aren't aware exactly of what their plan is and what their timeline is.
We don't know.
But it seems to me, at least, and that's, I think, the thing that Flyers fans can look at, and people, kind of finding a newfound respect for this management regime versus the Chuck Fletcher, where at least with Briere and company, there seems to be some sort of plan that you can point to with the acquiring of the assets. There's this window waiting for Mitchkov, the cap's coming off the books. Like it all makes sense, right? Where in the past, I think a big issue was that a lot of it made no sense, right? So at least you have that. It always
felt like they were kicking their problems like down the road.
Exactly.
Where it seems like the Flyers at least are addressing them up front. My only thing with like coming back for Walker, I really like Walker, but I'm not giving Walker any kind of term, and I'm not giving him $5 million a year. There's
I'd give
zero.
him 4 million, like 2 years, maybe three
Even
years.
yeah, okay, yeah, sure, two
That's what
years,
he's worth. That's what
right
he's
to
worth.
us,
Yeah.
but another team will give him more, and that's kind of the problem. Is that like I'm not looking to give a guy that kind of money for an extended period of time when we already have Drysdale here, Risto here.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to talk about Seeler in a minute. We still have Sanheim. We have York. It's like we have
You
young
got Bonk
guys.
coming.
We
Yeah.
can't. I can do 1 2 years because those are adjustable, right? You can move a player, but when you take on term, you're committing to that guy. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, you are part of the solution
And
here.
you might not be able to move him, right? Like after one season, if he falls off a cliff because it's a career year, that's where the risk comes in. And I think that's also why the Flyers didn't probably want to go
Okay.
for that long-term $5 million type of deal with him. So
I also think that the Flyers know more about the Flyers' injuries than we do. You know, the injuries
likely,
to
yeah.
Risto, Drysdale, Sealer. We don't know. You know, they could all be out the entire season for all I know. I mean, not probably not Sealer, but Risto and Drysdale.
The
For
potential's
all
there. Yeah.
that, but to be honest with you, with the fact that they moved Walker and didn't hold on to him and that they're still fighting for a playoff spot and they were still willing to do this, that tells me that they are somewhat optimistic that one of these two guys is coming back. I just don't think you want to hamper yourself too much when you're fighting for a playoff spot, but the value was there in return. And I highly doubt that they view Joe Hansen in the same respect as like Twitter and HF boards and how people talk about these guys. Again, think about the way Cal Peterson is talked about publicly versus how the team talks about him publicly. Think about how Sean Walker was handled by the team versus how the fan base
Always
treated
just a
Sean
throw
Walker.
in and look, you got a first round pick, right? So
So I think they look at everything is kind of workable. They look at a guy who had pedigree through his career. They don't look at it as like, oh, this guy's done. If they really thought that he was completely done, I don't know if they would have made this trade. Not with him. There was
yeah.
probably another player
The
that they could have taken
only
money on. They would have taken less in return. Because why hamper yourself if you think you're taking on a guy who will just be a burden? Because they don't
well,
look at Cam Atkinson as just a burden either.
no, I mean it depends
And we'll
how
talk about
enticed
him
they
too.
it depends how enticed they are by the first round pick, obviously. The only caveat, I guess, is if that relationship between Tortorella and Johansson's irreparable, then obviously he's an anchor in the sense that you're bearing him in the AHL. But at that point,
But think about
even if that's the case, Yariv, I mean, he's still only going to be 2.8 million on your books for 1 year, so
so
it's not the worst case scenario. But also, I feel like like if you're a GM, you're not just making moves willy nilly and not involving your coach. So I would imagine he probably talked to Tortorella and said, "Hey, I know you guys didn't see eye to eye in the past, but can we potentially make this work down the line? If somebody doesn't pick him up
well,
or if we don't flip him or something."
so I want to bring up a caveat, right? And I agree with everything you said. To those thinking that like if they actually didn't care about this player at all and saw no interest in him being part of this organization, how does that explain what they did with Kevin Hayes? They moved him at a loss, ate his cap, got almost nothing in return for him.
Yeah.
Like, so again, I get that they got the value of the first round pick, but if they thought they were going to burden their locker room, right? And they thought they were going to burden their organization with a negative thing, would it be as enticing to them?
It
I'm
doesn't
just
seem like it because they value that culture so much.
exactly. And we can get into the next topic because this, I think, this deal, and this has been echoed by other people. This is a culture move. Nick Seeler finally gets his deal. I mean, this is like a movie moment for this guy. I mean, if you think about like Jerry Maguire, which is one of my favorite movies ever. He's like a guy who's underpaid the entire time. For some reason I can't remember his name right now, which is embarrassing because I've seen this movie like 15 times. But he can't get his contract the whole time, and he finally gets like a multi-year deal for like few million. He's underappreciated player. Nick Seeler gets a $2.7 million per year over 4 years. And again, I think if you don't give him the term, he wanted more money. I would have never signed Sealer for above 3. I think
Yeah.
2.7 is the like high, but it is the market value for a bottom pairing defensive defenseman. We see other comparable contracts that have gotten that around the league, but I do think the Flyers wanted him. I think they wanted him here. He obviously, and this has been echoed by Tortorella over and over again, this is a huge part of the culture here. We respect Scott Lawton for what he brings, Sean Couturier, these guys who are kind of like glue guys. Nick Seeler is obviously one of those guys, right? He should have earned everyone's respect. I saw some people freaking out over the term. Like, again, I'm not really that worried about it. Vasili, you did mention before we started that he has the first 2 years. He has trade protection, so he has a no trade clause for those first 2 years. I don't see him getting traded anyway. I don't think the Flyers are really trying to move him. And, by the time his cap hit will be even somewhat annoying as he enters kind of those late 30s, the cap will probably be up by like $12 million at that point, maybe even more from what it is right now. I think he's just over 3% of the cap now. He'll probably be around 2% of the cap. It's just not going to be that huge of an issue. So I am very happy for Nick Seeler. Again, I really love the way he has played this year. Like, loved it. Like, I was
he earned the
cringing at the
deal.
idea. Sorry.
I was just gonna say he earned the deal,
Yes, he
essentially.
absolutely earned his deal. Go ahead, Vasily. Yeah, why don't you add? We'll go back and forth.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for Sealer, this was my thoughts on him. Like, he's a really good depth defenseman. Obviously, you have to look at the record before he joined the Flyers, right? Not much of an NHL mainstay, but also he didn't really get much of a shot with a lot of organizations, and the Flyers are kind of the first to do that. So they're benefiting obviously from just his improvement and how his play has kind of progressed through the last couple of seasons here. Obviously, he's leading the NHL in blocks. We know how important that is to a John Tortorella team. So I could imagine that he's advocating to keep a guy like Sealer, and just the culture aspect. Like, he's a guy that's going to put his body on the line for his teammates night in, night out. Really good locker room guy. We know how important the culture is to the Flyers, but keeping a glue culture guy around like a Sealer, it's definitely something I think the Flyers management wanted to do. And I think he's a guy that they really want around for this next crop of young defensemen to kind of learn from, just in terms of what it takes to be an NHL pro day in, day out situation. And just a guy that you can learn from in terms of adversity, right? Because if you look at adversity within a career, who's gone through more adversity than a guy like Nick Seeler, who's almost out of the league, essentially retired for a year, then comes back and,
Yeah.
is able to get a life-changing contract that's, worth 10.8 million at the end of the 4 years. So the cap hit's 2.7 million. I sent a tweet out a couple weeks ago stating I wouldn't sign him personally to anything over 2 million. Like, I still feel that way, that he's like, he's a $2 million defenseman for what he typically will bring you. But based on the fact that he was making 775,000, a significant raise is likely earned here, because he was getting underpaid this season and the last for what he brought you, right? So you kind of overpay a little bit because you've been, getting a bargain in a sense in him for the last 2 seasons at 775,000 cap hit. So it makes sense. He's got 12 points this season. He's a plus 15 in 63 games played. I was also placed on IR, which is something to mention, which is, not a good thing for just the Flyers defense, where you're subtracting almost your most consistent pairing now with him and Walker obviously being traded, and now Seeler being hurt here. So we'll get into all that and the repercussions. But just in terms of the deal, like, it's a slight overpay. He has the full no trade for, the first 2 seasons, but I think it's a fair deal for him. I don't really see any problems with it. And if you needed to trade him at any point, just based on how many teams it seemed that were interested in his service at this deadline, I don't think you're going to have much of a problem, especially at that cap hit. And there's a cost certainty in a sense too. But I don't expect them to move him anytime soon or anything like that. But if if it ever arises where you need to, that's the benefit of having a 2.7 versus a 3.3. Where, obviously even the 600,000 can help cap wise when it comes down to, like, making moves like this and trying to fit certain players into other teams if you do need to move him potentially.
I mean,
But
I think they look
sorry,
at
go
him
ahead.
as like a permanent number 6
Yeah,
on this
exactly,
team.
which isn't bad. And just looking at the cap, right? Like, I actually calculated this. So the cap is rumored to go up to 87.7 million for next season. So that's a significant raise from, I believe it's 83.5 this season. So about like 4 million essentially. if you subtract Sealer's cap hit from the overall cap percentage of that 87.7 million that's projected for next season, he's literally taking up 3.1% of your total cap, which is
Okay.
literally
Yeah.
minimal, right? So yeah, it's really a minimal cap hit for a guy that's, overplayed his contract for 2 seasons. So I think it's a thing that too, if you're a management staff, you do want to show players that, hey, if you play well here and you play your ass off, we're going to reward you.
He
And
definitely gives
you will
everything to this team.
exactly, you
There is
will
no
get a
doubt about that.
raise if you're playing in that manner and you're putting it all on the line.
That
It definitely well
that's the
deserved.
culture thing we're talking. I'm sorry to cut you off, but that's the culture thing, right? That's what they're paying for. That's why he got term. I really don't think he would have if he wasn't that much of a culture fit, which I do think Sean Walker is to a degree as well. I don't think I think they want him to rub off on every
On these
defenseman.
younger guys coming up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the same way they want Scott Lawton to rub off on guys, right? That maybe Scott Lawton rubbed off on Ryan Paling for all we know, right? And look at Paling's um, evolution as he's kind of joined this team. And look, we've talked about this for the last couple of years. How do the Boston Bruins do it? How do they bring in new guys? And look, even JVR, like how do they bring guys into their room and they don't end up being shit players? Like they all end up playing to their ability. There is a culture there that manifests,
There's a
right?
standard as well, right? We
And
expect this from you, and if we don't get it, then
and
we're gonna
don't
look
you
for elsewhere.
Well,
So
don't you think that's kind of happening here? Like you even see the way people go like, "Oh, we got Jamie Drysdale, we'll fix him." That's my same attitude with bringing in um Johansson. I'm like, "Well, let's bring him into our system. Can we get more out of him?" Right? Why do we have to jump immediately to buy out this guy is garbage? Why don't we see if we can fix it first?
well, you
Right?
can get an asset back, right? Like he's
Got
only
1 year with this
31.
team, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah.
You got 1 year next year with this team. Like, why jump already to be like bury him in the minors? Like why not see if you can turn it around for him? Again, just what 2 years ago, the guy had 63 points in 79 games. He's not that old, right? He's gonna be 32 this summer, right?
Yeah.
Like he's not like an ancient man here. He might be able to live up to that 1 year of his contract and maybe put up 40 points, 50 points for the team. That's possible for him. I'm seeing stuff that his games. Again, I haven't been watching him closely. We'll see. But at that point, wait to buy him out next year. Wait to see what his start of his season's like. Then bury him in the minors. See how he comes into camp. Maybe he comes in. Maybe Tortorella has a talk with him. He's like, look, you come into camp in the best shape of your life,
And you'll get a chance. Yeah.
and you'll get a real chance, right? Like this culture stuff. I think it's underrated. Like I've heard so many people joke around about, like these guys who have like gotten playing time that are not that talented. And, people laughed at Paling, people laughed at all these guys. And like, you're not laughing anymore. And people laughed at Scott Lawton too, by the way. I've not forgot that. Like, I remember the expansion draft when
Seasons
everybody
and
was
seasons ago. Yep.
like, I remember that. Like, that is a huge element of professional sports. And if you look around the league, if you do not have the character,
Well, how does a team
you're
gel?
probably not winning a
That
Stanley Cup.
that's what it is, Yariv. It's how does a team gel, right? You can have
Right.
all the talent in the world, but if the pieces don't fit accordingly, sometimes you
I mean,
might not have a
we've
successful
seen that
team.
with teams.
Exactly.
We've seen teams that have all the talent in the world and just not be able
Well,
to
we've
put it together.
seen, obviously injuries played a factor, but look at those AV Flyers teams, right? Like they had a lot of talent, but it just didn't mesh.
In fact, if you look at that team, those teams overall, there was leadership, there were high character players, and they just didn't have the culture. Like
There was something wrong.
there was
Obviously, to your
all
point, that's what it was.
it was always something wrong. There's always some kind of drama, some kind of bullshit. That is not here anymore.
Well, how many times we said on this show it's all a top-down effect, right? And when you put
Yes.
in place the regime that now that they have, when they're kind of straightening it all out, I think that goes plays a huge factor, goes a long way in fixing a
Yeah.
lot that was wrong, right? So,
Yeah, I totally agree.
but so far, just for Briere and I guess what's happening around the trade deadline, I mean, I would say he's done everything that you would want. I can't really complain with the moves that he's made at this point.
No.
He's, gotten a really good return for Sean Walker. You have a guy in Johansson you might be able to flip into another asset down the line, and you re-sign one of your most valuable culture pieces to a pretty, team-friendly type deal that isn't going to be immovable down the line. So
Yeah,
just as a summary, like there's not really he didn't botch it from and a lot of people were, I think, expecting it, to be honest, just with like how he had to kind of thread the needle here,
yeah,
but he did a good job.
yeah. And I think Cal Peterson is the most likely guy to get bought out, if anything, which I still consider the most because he's kind of had his opportunity. And if the Flyers don't find that he'll be a, but again, his attitude hasn't been bad.
No.
So why not just ride it out? You're not trying to win a Stanley Cup. Just ride it
You have
out
a
instead of
veteran in the
burden your cap.
AHL. Well, you have a veteran in the AHL, and if there's an injury, at least he's played in the NHL before. Not well recently, but he's done it for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And again, he wouldn't have been put in the position that he was in if the Carter Hart stuff didn't break. So so two questions, right? First question is, are the Flyers done for the deadline? I think you brought up a great valid point that maybe there's still an opportunity here to flip Johansson.
I think that might be their only move if they make
Yeah.
another, or like if they, because everybody was, not everybody, but there's been a lot of rumors online and on Twitter just in terms of, would the Flyers, send a mid-round pick to add some goalie depth, or
I
add,
think it's more what I said though. Flip
yeah,
Sandstrom for a vet,
yeah, potentially
not a
that,
not a pick.
or add a depth forward potentially. But why would you make a move to add a depth forward
No,
when probably
they just
Johansson is
did.
going to be
Yeah.
better than any depth forward that you would add, arguably? Just due to the fact too that, hey, like if he's a few seasons removed from playing top 6 minutes, I don't know if he can do it well, but if somebody got hurt, you could move him up there and he's done it, right? Whereas like that fourth liner you'd acquire instead, like would they be able to do that? Probably not. So
Well,
I'd imagine, at least not as effectively as Johansson would. So I'd
remember Derek
imagine,
Brassard?
yeah, yeah. I mean, if they get a guy like that,
I mean, maybe
one
that's
one
Johansson.
thing, yeah, could be one thing I thought that was interesting is Sam Gagne was put on waivers by the Oilers. I thought that was interesting. Maybe the Flyers might nab him potentially as like a
I
depth
can't see
guy,
it.
but he cleared, so
Okay.
nobody
I really can't
nobody
see the
picked him up.
Flyers like unless it's a defenseman or a goalie. I can't see them adding a single forward. I really can't, just because
Yeah.
there's such a numbers game already.
I think I agree. I think they might flip Johansson. I could totally see that, but I also think maybe
I
he
think
could
they're
get
trying to.
claimed.
I
I
think
think
they're
maybe he
trying
could
to.
get claimed. They're trying to put feelers out there, like we're
Yeah.
interested, but not at 4 million type of
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, if his cap hit wasn't 4 million, I think more teams would be interested
if
in
he
his
was two and
services.
a half, 3 million, you'd get claimed.
I
100%.
think, yeah. I mean, at his production and the
He's
fact that he
that's
wasn't putting up points on a team that scores a lot of points, it's like,
that's not a great sign, but still.
yeah, yeah. I just can't see that again. If the Flyers are really in a bit rebuild mode, which again I still believe is just a marketing statement, but they're not going for it, right? They're not going to expend any assets
Yeah.
to try to compete in the playoffs. I
I'd
can't see that.
I'd imagine it gets pretty quiet for them, like in terms of
It,
Friday and any moves, but you never know, like we're saying, right? Like all this stuff's developing, you never know what's gonna happen. Like there's rumors that, of Jacob Chitrin and stuff like that. Who knows how true all that is? But I will say that it seems like this front office, like if there's an opportunity to make a hockey trade that actually will help them down the line, they're not afraid to do it at any point, like and say, hey, like, oh, the timing's not right. No, they'll pull the trigger. So you never know what kind of hockey trades will arise. But I would expect that, you know, Ottawa could always move Chikrin at the draft, or they could move him, in the off season, right? I don't believe he's a UFA.
but he
So
does have a no trade. I'm looking right now. He has a no movement clause, no
yeah.
trade
So
clause.
that's
So
why maybe it could be a summer move, because sometimes it takes time. It takes time to, navigate these types of things with the agents and, what teams are interested in, all that. So like we saw last season, with potentially the Provorov trade, the Hayes trade, Briere and Co., they could be having conversations now that extend to the offseason where you're kind of laying the groundwork for maybe hockey trades you might want to make
I
with other
think
teams.
I think that's where the Flyers will be getting more creative is in the
Yeah.
offseason. There are pieces here that need to be figured out, right? Like we have too many wingers,
No
no
centers.
no I mean we have like centers, but we don't We
Not
have
top six
Frost.
centers,
I mean, we
ideally.
have Coots, but he's, we'll talk about that, but he's obviously, still working his way back.
Yeah.
There's just so many question marks with this team that it's like this is gonna take time anyway. I don't
It's
believe,
interesting though. There's a
yeah,
lot at play.
I don't believe. I still hear people saying that the Flyers are playing above their head. I still do not buy that. If they are, then Vasili and I are, we have a crystal ball because how the hell do we know that they were going to be in this position? We've been saying it for how long that this team
They're
on
going to be on the
paper,
playoff bubble, which is where they are
which is
right now.
exactly where they are. They're playing to their talent level. They are
Yeah.
not a Stanley Cup contender, but they are not completely
Though
incompetent. They
I
have some
will
holes, but not immense ones.
Though I will say, like, if you would have told me before the season you take away Carter Hart, I don't know what my thoughts would have been. But Urson's really
Well,
stepped up and played well, so that's
they
also a
he
factor.
has, but the loss of Carter Hart has affected this team. I mean, we have
100%.
lost some
Yeah.
games that we probably would have won if Carter Hart was in net, right? Like
Yeah. And if you're looking past that, I
the
mean, you're
Pens game,
just,
which was a huge game.
yeah.
That's an
If you're
example.
looking past that, you're just, haven't been watching, you're not assessing the fact that, hey, like, he was an elite goalie in the league. It's obviously unfortunate what happened, and it's
Yeah.
affecting them for sure.
Yeah. So I guess the other question is, what does the Flyers D look like? I mean, as of right now, Vasili mentioned it earlier. Nick Seeler has been placed on IR. Could be a fracture. We're not entirely sure, but he's week to week. So right now they have three defensemen on a week to week basis, right? With Ristolainen, Jamie Drysdale, and Nick Seeler. Adam Yinning has been called up. I did have it a little bit later, but might as well bring it up now. So they got Yinning and Ronnie Adder with the team. So two young guys.
And they're going to
Zamula is
play.
still here, right? Stahl is still here. This is what I was kind of worried about, right? Like we have a extremely tough game against the Florida Panthers coming up, but this team has had the next man up mentality, and they got to roll through it. What do you think the combinations could look like? Let's just say for next game. I mean, my immediate thought is that they're just going to have Yinning and Adder play as a pairing in the bottom pairing. They're going to have Zamula stick with Stahl. They're going to play second pairing, and they'll keep the top pairing in order. And I think they're just going to roll with that. I mean, are you on the same page?
Yeah, that was my thoughts exactly. You'll stick with York and Sandheim. They've been so good. And I mean, York has been playing really well lately, and we'll get into him afterwards. Zamula Stahl, they've played together throughout not majority of the season, but they've had time together. So why break something up that's familiar? And you have Ginning and Adder, who I believe did play a bit together in Lehigh. And I mean, you have a guy, at least stylistically, of Ginning who's more defensively oriented, and a guy like Adder who's more offensively oriented. So it does make a lot of sense to pair them together. I guess the one thing you could do is you could split up York and Sandheim, right? But I think if you do that, you're effectively disbanding probably your one solid defense pairing that works
Right.
100%. Whereas the other two, like Zamula Stahl, can work, but we've seen it not work on a lot of nights. And Ginning and Adder could look good together, but we just don't know. And
Well,
you're
they've played in the
throwing,
AHL together
yeah,
too.
but you're throwing them into the fire here down the stretch run as rookies. So we'll see how
I
that works. I would imagine they're going to stick with Sandheim and York. I would also think that like they probably are going to hold on to Stahl. Like I know before the season, people thought, oh,
with
Stahl
these
could get
injuries.
moved. With the injuries and just with trading Walker, I don't see how they would move him now because you're basically limiting yourself to five defensemen if you move him, and then you're going to have three rookies. That technically four with Zamula in there. I just don't think they're going to do that.
I don't
So,
think so either.
yeah, Stahl's likely
And
staying.
Drysdale's 21, so it's
Yeah,
like,
he might be a rookie essentially,
yeah,
anyways. But yeah, like I think what you mentioned earlier is a great point. Like I would imagine, maybe there's some insight on a guy like Risto or Drysdale potentially coming back earlier than they expect. I know there's supposed to be updates on them shortly, so we'll see there. And then maybe, Sealer gets put on IR, but you can activate him again in 7 days. So like maybe he misses a week and comes back or
yeah.
something. Like who really knows? I would imagine that's the case, but I guess we'll see. Also, not to say I'm surprised they called up Jennings, but I am a little bit surprised that they didn't bring up Belpedio instead of Jennings. And my reasoning is you're already going with a very rookie heavy lineup, so maybe they'd bring Belpedo in because it's more of a veteran presence. But obviously, I know there was rumors of Ginning potentially going out back to Sweden after the season if he can't stick with, the NHL club. So maybe this is kind of his final shot. Like, hey, we know you want to leave, you can't make it, so here's your chance, kid.
Yeah, I think it's also the role, right? Like we've talked about before, right? Like not the Belpedo. I think Belpedio, if this was the playoffs, he probably would have been most likely to be called up. But I think with Yinning, it's like he is a stay-at-home defenseman. He's in the way, as Torts
Yeah.
likes to
And he's
say.
not super young, right? Like I think he's 23 or 24.
Yeah, I mean he did get a cup of tea with him last year. I think it makes sense to give him an adder to look. Andre's not going anywhere.
Yeah,
Let him
Yenning's 24.
right. They need the size on the back end. That's the other thing I like about Joe Hansen is a 6'3". We don't necessarily have
As
like big centers.
as is Yenning as well. So
Right. So like Ginning's a big boy. I think that's kind of the incentive there. Like they need the strength back there. Haddard's a big kid too. I think he might be 6'4". So like, I don't know. I think they kind of look at it as like the size element and kind of give him a chance here, see what they have in him. And again, Tort says very clearly that that's the guy that was recommended by the team to call up, right?
yeah.
So
To your
clearly he's
point,
been doing
right?
something right.
To your point, like Adard 6'3", Jennings 6'3", Belpedio's only 5'11", so maybe the
Right.
size does play a factor.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a factor with Andrea. I mean, I think his size is going to mean it's going to take him a little bit longer to adapt.
agreed.
And he's also younger than the other guys. Like, give him some
First
time.
year playing North American hockey as
Right.
well. So
Exactly. So, and there's also Helge Grans, who, again, this is why I'm not in love with draft picks. Helge Grans was a high second round pick, right? This is not like,
and he hasn't really been turning the world on fire
yeah,
in the
and he's
AHL
got
or anything.
size and he can skate and the whole thing. So it's like, he did have a big injury that he was dealing with this year too. So, want to give him some grace with that. But, again, I think the Flyers need to kind of experiment here.
Yeah,
And I think Belpedio is kind of in their back pocket, right?
yeah,
He did look really good when he did play with this team, but it is a little surprising, to that point. Like, if there's another injury, I could see it. But I think ideally what the Flyers would be probably looking at is like Nick Seeler if he was healthy. Then I could see maybe the lines getting mixed up. Like
it'd
maybe
probably be
Sealer.
Sealer and Zamula. Maybe
I was actually thinking Sealer and Sandheim.
I could see
Uh,
that as
and
well.
then
Yeah,
York and Stahl, and then Zamula with like Addard or
you
Yinning,
spread it
something
up,
like that.
spread it
Yeah,
out a bit in terms of the depth. Yeah,
right, exactly. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what's going on with the
like
health. Flyers have a tough schedule up ahead, so
yeah, I
it's gonna
think
get ugly.
I think like
It could get ugly.
it could. I think like
It,
what we were
it
saying,
could get
right?
ugly. Yeah.
Or what we were saying is, they'll probably stick with that York Sandheim pairing, but like if they're just a defensive black hole like that Zamula Stahl pairing, that Yinning Addard pairing, then they'll just be forced to break them up. That's what will eventually happen. So they're hoping that doesn't happen, but
Yeah.
you never know. You have to adjust on the fly, right? Like if those two defense pairings get burned for 4 goals against, in 2 periods against Florida on Thursday, we might
Well,
see a whole new setup in the third period. Like you never
right.
know, right?
That
Tortorella's not a stranger to mixing and putting things in the blender when he needs to.
I honestly I'm a little nervous about Addard's defensive ability, though I am excited for his offensive and his skating and his
Yeah.
aggression. I'm just nervous that he'll make a couple big mistakes and get kind of benched. Yinning, on the other hand, I don't really anticipate that. I actually think he's gonna fit in really nicely, and I think Tortorella, like he might be here to stay
He's a
type of
safe
thing.
player and just terms of his style and how he's
Exactly.
doing things out there, right? Like he's not a guy who what's the main aspect of his game is I need to jump up and take that big chance. Maybe
No.
there's a bad thing in terms of the fact he could be too safe sometimes, but I think for a rookie, you'd rather have a guy that's known and safe versus a guy that's unpredictable. So
Yeah, and again, he looked good when he played here for the Flyers. I believe they won the game that he was playing when he got called up last year. So, I don't know. I have kind of a good feeling, but I'm a little more nervous about Adder than Yinning. But we'll see. Look, it's a home run stretch right now. The Flyers do not have any leeway. They have a very tough schedule ahead of them with lots of contending teams in there, lots of talented teams. The offense is not the issue right now. The depth is definitely there. But the defense with the 3 injuries, those are big key injuries. It's not the same defense that got them to this point. and half of the goaltending is gone. So like some of the strength of this team has been depleted at, one of the biggest times of the year. And now with Walker being moved, that reliability of the top four has now been taken away.
Yep.
So we're gonna have to get used to that. It will come with some growing pains, but you never know. They could surprise you. Obviously Shaw is a phenomenal defensive coach. So you never know. And
And
again, I don't trust Lappy at this point. So they might be able to get more out of them than Lappy.
And this could be a benefit of kind of slow cooking your guys in the AHL, at least from a defense perspective, right? Like we've seen what rushing defensemen can do to them in their game of the NHL level. At this point, like Adard and Ginning have played multiple seasons in the AHL. Like this could just be like it's their time now and they're ready.
It
And this is
definitely
where they
is.
take the next step, right? So we'll see how they perform. But at least for their careers, this is I would say for both of them being like 24, I believe this is a kind of seize it opportunity, right? Like who
It's
knows when they
time to
may
touch the NHL.
yeah, well, who knows if they're gonna get extended looks after this, especially if they don't play well, right? Like you have Adard who's literally turning 25, I think in like 10 days, and Jinning who's 24 here. So if who yeah, it was 24. So if they're not guys that are gonna make it soon, when are they gonna make it? So I think it's kind of almost shit or get off the pot for both of
Yeah.
them. So let's see what they can do in a stretch drive when it kind of actually matters.
Yeah. No, I think well said. But let's talk a little bit about trade rumors or trade deals from around the NHL. Then we'll come back to the Flyers. So this actually broke while I don't know if you saw this facility. This broke as we were recording, but
No, I
the
didn't.
Vegas Golden Knights have acquired Noah Hannafin. The details of that trade have not come out fully. I'm sure they will be out by the time. I have not seen a 100% confirmation, but I did see Kevin Weeks tweet and a Elliot Friedman tweet. The details have not been released yet, but I don't know how the hell Vegas keeps doing this,
And
dude.
they got Mantha the other day, so
Yeah, so they got Anthony Mantha as well for a second and a fourth from the Washington Capitals. He's going to be playing tonight, I believe. Yeah, I believe he's playing tonight. I'm pretty sure Vegas is playing right now. Probably
no, they're Thursday.
they're
Thursday.
Thursday. Okay, sorry. So they'll be playing probably the day you're listening to this. So Mantha will have his debut, and looks like maybe even Hannafin. So they add two pretty significant pieces. Hannafin, more significant than Mantha. But Mantha probably will also be a nice fit for them. A 6'5", goal scoring
Scored
type.
20 goals multiple times. So
Right, like 20 plus goal scorer. I think if he's in the right situation, he could probably be a better goal scorer. Um, yeah, huge pickup for Vegas and a team that's already a contender to win the Stanley Cup, one that already just won a Stanley Cup, and they're going to be going for it
yeah,
again.
that IR money, Reeve, comes in handy, right? When you can put I think 9.5 million of Mark Stone and utilize that. And
I'm sure they'd
I
rather have Stone in the
Alec,
lineup, to be honest.
yeah, Alec Martinez as well on the IR. So I think
Also a big loss.
that probably gives them the ammo and the cap space to get your Mantha and
Yeah.
your Hannafin. But imagine if they can come back those two at some point in the playoffs, and that Vegas team is even more stacked, right? Like you're adding Stone and Martinez in to Mantha, and Hannafin as well. I don't know if Vegas is gonna repeat, but hey, like they have a roster to do it, that's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, look, the reality is when you have a window, and their window is now. I don't know
Gotta
when it's gonna
utilize it.
break for them. Yeah, you got to utilize it. So again, I'm not sure what they gave up in the trade. I'm sure a first plus a prospect for Hannafin, it probably was pretty steep. To some degree, was arguably the prize pickup. Him and Jake Gensel. I would say are probably the two big players that were remaining after the Lindholm trade. Which again, there might be another trade of Lindholm, which I think is crazy.
Vancouver said they may flip him potentially, which I don't really
I don't buy
get for
that.
what, especially with them.
I
And
get why they won Jay Gensel, but I just don't see a huge difference between Lindholm and Gensel.
I feel like Lindholm would be better defensively as well. So
So I really like Jake Gensel, but it's like, the hell do you guys like? What more does that team need offensively that you're like,
yeah,
oh, we traded for this guy and we're gonna flip it? I don't know. They seem to have enough offensive pieces to compete with any team in the league. So why? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not expert on the Vancouver Canucks, but very interesting trade for the Vegas Golden Knights. Then another huge trade, definitely one that will impact the Flyers. The Florida Panthers get Vladimir Tarasenko. They traded a 2025 third round pick and a 2024 fourth round pick. I believe there was 50% retained on that. So the Florida Panthers, which is already the best scoring team in the NHL as far as scoring depth, adds another goal scorer to the mix.
Yeah.
So the Flyers will have a depleted defense and have to deal with a insane amount of
Well,
goal
just
scorers.
add
Um,
Tarasenko to that Florida power play that's already so good. And then you have
well,
Barkov, his countryman, maybe
you
even
know,
potentially setting him up there.
again, I
Or
have no idea
not
if
his
it's true,
countryman,
but
but
do you think that this could? That's a good point, actually. Do you think this could one in some kind of way kind of bite them in the ass a little bit? Because it's like it seems like one of those things where it's like this is a little too much shooters. Like who the hell? Like
who's gonna check, right? Like who's gonna be your defensive
yeah,
specialist? Um,
I guess the Chuck Barkov is obviously a phenomenal two-way player, maybe the best in the league right now.
yeah.
I just, I just look at it as like, why was that their big pickup? I guess because he wasn't that expensive.
He was what a third and a fourth, or a second and a third?
A third next year and a fourth this year, and at 50% retained. So like, it was relatively cheap for what, especially because the guy used to be a 40 goal
Yeah.
scorer,
I think that's
and
what
he's
it
still a
probably
20 goal
is.
scorer now.
I think that's what it could be, is like maybe they had other options of guys who were younger, or other guys that could be more impact players for them than a Tarasenko is at this stage in his career. But also, what do you have to give up to get those guys? And did they have the assets to make those
Right. Yeah.
trades? Where like you're giving a third and a fourth, like most teams have that. So
I feel like
it's
it
an
could
easy.
be immensely beneficial for them or just kind of be a
Yeah,
wash.
but to be honest, like he's got 17 goals in 57 games. Like he's still gonna probably get close to
Yeah.
maybe 30 goals
I
potentially.
mean,
Um,
25 is definitely within that range.
yeah,
And I mean,
so
you never know with Florida, maybe it
th
spikes.
that's the one thing that I will say with Tarasenko, that it makes sense for me, because Ottawa, I don't know if they were gonna get him in the position to utilize him, but I think Florida controls the puck so much that, if he just needs to be your trigger man for setups because Barkov's feeding him all the time, like, then it's a lot easier, right? Where I don't know if Ottawa was really getting him into those positions because they just aren't the greatest team, probably don't have a lot of
Yeah.
puck possession. Florida's the opposite of that, but it's an interesting trade. I mean, it's going to be great to see. I don't know if Barkov and him will play together, I assume on the power play, but that'll be an interesting combo to see. Um,
Yeah.
it's something with the Russians, right? Just the Russian snipers.
I
But
mean, I've
yeah,
always liked Tarasenko,
me
so
too. Me
I'm a,
too.
I'm a
I
fan.
think, to be honest, I think those shoulder surgeries kind of derailed his career a bit. Like he was
Yeah.
50, 60 goal guy, and then those surgeries, he just was not the same after,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. Um, I remember when everybody thought we had to like add so much for Voracek for Tarasenko, and I was like, they're same caliber of player. I really think even till today, people do not realize how good Jake Voracek
Well,
was.
yeah, he was very underrated. I just think it's two different styles. You're trading a guy who
Yes,
literally is a pure shooter for a guy who's a pure passer. So if you want the pure passer, then it makes sense. If you want the pure shooter,
that's
then
all
it
I saw. Yeah,
makes sense. And that's kind of what Atkinson, I guess, and Voracek was as well. Though I don't think Atkinson is ever on the
I
same
think
level of
Atkinson.
him in terms
No,
of like goal
I don't
scoring
think
level
he's.
versus passing ability.
I don't
So
think he ever hit the level of Tarasenko or
no,
Voracek in his
he
career.
he had a 40 goal season that one time, and I mean that's obviously great, and he accomplished
He
that,
was
but he
a
never he
he was
never
a
got back to that,
he
right?
was a top six forward, not a genuine top line player.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like he wasn't a consistent top line player. He was a consistent top six forward.
Could go on the
So
top line at points, but he
right,
wasn't an everyday guy like that.
right. Even though he did have the two-way game, and that's the one thing he had above both Voracek, and I guess you could look at that as being the value. He had a better, no, not as much today, but he had a better two-way game over Voracek and over Tarasenko. So like
Yep.
he was a very balanced player. All right. The other big trade, and there's a lot to go through, so we'll try to go through all the ones that happened today. The New York Rangers, this one also affects the Flyers in some kind of way because if they drop to a wild card spot and end up playing in a wild card spot, which is still possible. They'll have to play the Rangers most likely in the first round. The New York Rangers have acquired Alex Wenberg from Seattle Kraken for a second round pick in 2024 and a conditional fourth round pick in the 2025 NHL draft. I'm not sure what the condition is. I'm sure it has something to do with going to Stanley Cup or something like that.
Yeah, that's a nice depth deal
Oh,
for the
50%
Rangers.
retained on Wenberg as well.
Yeah, that's a nice depth deal for them. I always have liked Wenberg, like as a third line type of role.
Yeah,
Like
rich
he
get
can,
richer in
yeah,
this kind.
he can pitch in some offense, play well defensively. I saw Steve tweet out that he liked the trade. So I mean,
Yeah, I saw it
if
too.
you're a Rangers fan listening to this, I guess you should be happy. I mean, you're getting a Wenberg because he can definitely help.
Yeah,
But yeah, definitely a depth addition for a team like that.
yeah. Screw the Rangers. All right. Next on the list, what did I have? I'm gonna go back to the Metro stuff. I have like kind of a Metro category, um, that are not trades yet, but I guess the big one that kind of affects the Flyers, just that it was. If you really look at the deal that the Colorado Avalanche made with the Flyers, part of the incentive of getting Sean Walker was a player that they moved out, a player that we coveted here, and I think we would have absolutely loved to get this trade in a deal. Luckily we got Jamie Drysdale. They're both players who have dealt with injury problems, just so everybody's aware of that. It's
And
not
Byram's are concussion related, which I would imagine is more serious in my
That's
mind.
also a very good point. I totally agree with that because that could be career ending, as we've seen with several players, one of which being Nolan Patrick. Again, I don't think that's going to be the case with Bowen Byram, but Bowen Byram gets traded to the Buffalo Sabres for Casey Middlestat, who's having a career year right now. They have a situation where they have their two top centers already locked up. They have Tage Thompson locked up. It's kind of a numbers game for them, but they add Bowen Byram to a decor that right now is not that great, but potentially could end up being a just all class defensive core with Owen Power, Rasmus Sandin, uh, it's not Sandin. Oh my God, Darlene,
Yeah.
Jesus. Just those three names alone, the pedigree there, is just really, really high with those three. So just really impressive, kind of trade, a trade that really gives the Colorado exactly what they needed, which is something they've been missing. Which again, they tried to bring in Joe Hansen to play that role. He wasn't able to really play that role. He ended up dropping down kind of like third line center. Casey Middlestat, a young up and coming young player who now gets to play behind Nathan McKinnon. It seems like it's exactly what they needed. I think Colorado made two smart picks. They paid a high price. But they did move out some salary. Again, this is why they needed the Flyers to take on Duchesne, because they're going to have to re-sign Middlestat as well beyond this year. So this was a big trade for them. People are calling them winners of the trade deadline. I think now you can make the case that it might be Vegas. But Avs are obviously going for it, as they should. They have the talent to do so. And maybe this is the most impactful trade, just because there is a general need for a crucial position on your team,
Yeah.
and you filled it. You paid a high price to fill it, but you not only filled it for this year, but for the foreseeable future. So I do like that trade for them.
It's basically like a domino effect where you're almost trading essentially like your first round pick, Joe Hansen and Byram for Middlestad. So that's
Yeah.
pretty much the overall sum up for the Abs. So they paid a hefty price to fill that center role, but it's obviously something they feel like they need to kind of get back to potentially winning a cup, I mean, you can't really disagree, right? Like if you're a team that only has a center that can produce for you on one line, like a McKinnon, and there isn't somebody that can consistently produce behind that first line center, it's very tough to get out of multiple rounds in the playoffs, right? You need depth scoring. So they're hoping Middlestad can be that.
Yeah. I think he will be. I think that one's going to work out well for them, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think his
Um,
style would fit the way the Avs
and
play
he
for sure.
and I, from what I understand, Landeskog is rumored to be returning as well. So I assume he's going to be playing with Landeskog.
Hey, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not too sure, but I do know that, he's been out the whole season. So, That would
That
be
would
perfect
be,
timing, right?
yeah, to add the two of those to that lineup, could work out really well for them. But that might be one of those things you look back in retrospect where Casey Middlestat is probably going to be a top, at least second line center in the league for a good amount of time, the way he's projecting, at least playmaking, kind of all around offensive type of
Yeah.
guy. Bowen Byram could end up being like a back end of a D, just like top pairing, potential number one guy, and the same thing we got in Drysdale. So it's a big trade. Um, and we'll see. But I think it's one of those. It's a pure hockey trade. I think it was smart,
Yeah,
ballsy trade.
if you're Buffalo, right? Like look at that defense corps now. You
Yeah, I
have
think it's a good move for Buffalo.
Darlene,
I think
Power,
Buffalo kind of
and
wins.
Byram.
I think Buffalo kind of wins in the perception of that trade. But if Colorado ends up winning the Stanley Cup,
It won't matter.
Avs
Yeah.
win.
Yeah,
Just straight
exactly.
up. They made the right.
Down
They made
down
the
the
right play.
line, like maybe 10 years from now, you look at it like let's say, Byram becomes a steady top pair guy and he leads Buffalo back to the playoffs. Maybe it all works out for both teams.
Yeah.
I think it's a trade that will benefit both
Yeah,
potentially.
yeah, no, absolutely. And also when you have Kale McCarr and Devin Taves as your top pairing,
Do you need Byram?
well, I'm just saying you can make this type of risk,
Of
right?
course,
So they
yeah.
bring in Sean Walker to play Bowen Byram's position. And quite frankly, Sean Walker might be better than Bowen Byram right now. So it's also an upgrade in that respect. Just the type of season Sean Walker's had.
Yeah,
And
career year,
yeah,
so.
and there's a chance they might resign him if he does exceptional. I mean, Manson did a fantastic job for them, helped them win a Stanley Cup. So this type of move, they short up the D, short up their center, cleared out cap space. It was a good move for them. And they didn't give up too much in the process too. They didn't go nuts. They gave up two high value assets, but not more beyond that. So I think it was good for a team that is one of the favorites to win a Stanley Cup. Definitely in the top four. All right. The next big trade is the Edmonton Oilers. This was on the surface level, not like a huge trade, but there were a lot of assets that went. Adam Henrique, who's probably going to play third line center for them. Sam Carrick and an unside draft choice and goaltender Ty Taylorend, and a seventh round draft pick in 2024 in a 3-team trade with the Ducks. So the Edmonton Oilers got those assets. The Ducks received. Anaheim receives the Oilers' first round pick in 2024 and a conditional fifth round pick in 2025. NHL draft. I assume that probably has to do with Stanley Cup expectations. And then Tampa Bay also received a fourth round pick in 2026 from Edmonton. I think that was cap retention, if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
on Adam Henrique or one of those contracts. Anyway, there's a lot going on there. I don't know. On the surface level, I just don't feel like this is exactly what Edmonton needed. I feel like all they ever need is like a solid defenseman to add to that
Yeah.
offensive core. But from what I understand, it's supposed to free up Drysdale a little bit and kind of take Nugent Hopkins out of that position. And Adam Henrique's having a really good season for Anaheim. So, it could be one of those kind of underlying, really good trades,
It frees up Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins to play less of a defensive role, and you
Right.
kind of assign that almost to Henrique, who's done it before, plays PK. I mean, I would agree. Like, what does Edmonton really need? They probably need to acquire Noah Hannafin. Like, that would have been a
Right.
good trade for them.
That's the one
But
that you're like,
imagine the price you're paying against your rival Calgary to get him. It probably would have been insurmountable from
we
an
thought they
asset
would have gone for
perspective.
Sean Walker.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know what their first round pick situation looks like. So who knows if they have the assets to even
Well,
go
they
up against
had the
some of these.
2024. Well, I guess the Flyers won in 2025, from what I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah. The scouts apparently were looking for that, which makes sense. So who knows? But I mean, at least for Edmonton, personally, I think the assets would have been better spent on a defenseman. But Henrique does give them depth, right? Like their
Look,
depth scoring isn't great. So he helps them there and he'll help them
yeah,
defensively. I still, just with the defensive corps that Edmonton has, even though Stuart Skinner's played well after the horrendous start, like I just don't think they have what it takes to win the cup. That's my opinion on
the
Edmonton.
the only way I can see them winning is if Draisaitl and McDavid play completely out of their
which is
minds.
totally possible.
They are humongous X factors.
Yeah,
But typically in the playoffs, you win
with depth.
you win with depth and you win with solid team defensive play. They have never shown the ability to do that for the games that really matter. Having said that, without their poor start, they have been on an absolute tear.
Yeah, so we
Um,
could be completely
and
wrong,
yeah,
but
and without that, they might be the number one ranked team in the league, quite frankly, on the tear that they've been on. But they just have to play good team defense. And maybe
yeah.
this is what they need. Again, we're not that close to the team. I just think it was interesting. Okay, so this is the last topic of the trade deadline. Then we'll get back to Flyers stuff. I just kind of noticed this, right? So the Devils have fired Lindy Rupp. Um, that happened yesterday.
Yeah.
Uh, the Pens are trading Jake Gensel. The Caps moved Mantha.
And might move Jensen, I've heard as well.
Okay, might move Jensen as well. Outside of the Islanders, that was the Flyers' competition. Did the other teams give up on trying to catch the Flyers?
I think the Penguins at this point and the Caps are kind of realizing the situation that they're in. And I mean, reason being, like, the Flyers are at 72 points right now with 63 games played. The Caps are at 65 points in 60 games played, so they got 3 games in hand. Penguins also 3 games in hand, 64 points. So I mean, if you're the Caps, you're still 7 points back of the Flyers with 3 games in hand. So even if you win your games in hand, you're still behind them. Same with the Penguins, right? Even if they won their games in hand, they're still behind the Flyers by 2 points. So I think they're kind of realizing, like, unless we really run the table and the Flyers kind of shit the bed, like, it's probably unlikely that we're going to make the playoffs here. So I think they're realizing that. They're saying, hey, let's get some assets. Let's see what we can do. I think they've effectively said, hey, like, if we trade these guys and our team goes on a run, sure, they go on a run. Like, nothing we can do about it. But they're actively thinking, you know what, this probably isn't our year to make it. So let's try to recoup something, which makes sense.
Because none of those teams were in a rebuilding mode.
Yeah,
Let's make that
exactly.
clear. The
Yeah.
Flyers did state publicly rebuild,
Yeah, and then
right? But the others did not.
The Devils are even in a worse situation technically. Like, they are at 64 points. So they're 8 points back of the Flyers, who are at 72, and they only have 1 game in hand on the Flyers. So they're really, don't have a lot of wiggle room. They'd really have to run the table here with 20 games left with a new coach. So I think the new coach firing is an attempt to do that, spark them, get the new coach bump. Maybe we win, 10 in a row or 8 in a row or go on a run. Will that happen? Who knows? Because you're implementing a whole new coach and system with almost 20 games left. Like, I imagine they're not going to go full bore with the new system. They'll probably retain some of what Ruff has in place. But, there's chaos that can come with a new coach, right? Like, they want new things. They want players to play in different ways. Like, I just don't think that it's the right move to make with 20 games left to try to salvage a season. You might as well, make the coaching change to end the year. That's my particular thought. Or why not do it like 20 games ago, 40 games in, when it can have a real impact? So,
Yeah. It seems
I
like it's a
think,
move for next year.
yeah,
Travis Green was a head coach, so they're not bringing in
for
inexperienced
Vancouver, but
guys.
he
Yeah.
he didn't do very well with a lot of
Right.
talent in Vancouver. As we're seeing, it's basically almost the same team essentially, and look at what they're kind of doing. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think the Devils, it's a panic move. Like, they're trying to panic and make the playoffs here. Washington and Pittsburgh, I think, they're trying to salvage some assets. The Islanders, I think, who really haven't made any moves here as of yet. Maybe they will on Friday. I guess we'll see. They're 4 points back of the Flyers with 2 games in hand. So if they won the 2 games in hand, technically would be tied with them. So I think at this point, that's the team to worry about if you're the Philadelphia Flyers in terms of who will
Yeah.
catch you. But one thing to caveat too is the Flyers are tied with the Red Wings and Lightning
Right.
in a wild card spot with 72 points as well. So let's say the Islanders did catch them and overtook them for that third Metro Division spot. The Flyers could still sneak into a wild card here. So that's also a possibility.
And the Flyers do play Tampa Bay after Florida, which is gonna be a
That's going
huge
to be a
game.
huge game.
And the
Yeah.
Islanders on Thursday. No,
Those
I'm
could
sorry.
be
Yes,
deciding factors for
well,
the
the
season.
Islanders play the Sharks next
Yeah.
at the Sharks building, but
You'd imagine that's a must win for them against a team that doesn't
Yeah,
have many must wins or hasn't really known
against
what a must win has been this season. So
arguably the worst team in the league, and then
you'd imagine they'll win that.
then they play the Kings, so that's going to be a tough game for them. But yeah, it's they don't necessarily have the hardest game upcoming, but the Flyers need to win some games here, otherwise they are going to drop. And with the defense taking a big hit, I am a little worried about our playoff spot. But um, it is what it is. People wanted a first round pick. I wanted you know, I wanted to stay in the playoffs. That was my thing. I wanted the playoff experience for the young guys on this
I still
team.
think it's possible that
It's
they make
definitely
it
still
in.
possible, but they got to get some bodies back.
Yeah, we'll see. I think it'll be interesting, and at least with the younger guys on defense, we'll see how they perform. Like if they come
Yeah,
in and
I
play
could be.
solid,
Yeah,
you
that
never know, right?
which with this
So,
team, absolutely possible, right? Like
well, it seems like
I'm
they have
very
a
open to
very
that.
next man up mentality, and
Right.
they understand their systems defensively well. I think that's also maybe a benefit of because people I saw a lot of people complaining, oh, why is Adder called up and he's scratched? And I mean, firstly, you need a seventh
We're
defenseman,
also
so
practicing with the team, which
well,
is
that's my point,
beneficial.
right?
Yeah.
Like the Flyers internally may have known, well, we're gonna trade Sean Walker. We're gonna need to
Right.
plug Adard in. Let's get him up early and get him acclimated to the
Right.
systems, fully acclimated to the team. Make sure like he's on the same page as the rest of the team here
Yeah.
because they know they're gonna need him to play well down the stretch. So
Yeah. And luckily they had some practices here with Yinning, so I'm nervous about it. I'm definitely nervous about it. The Islanders are making me nervous. There's still 20 games to go.
no,
There's
they've
still,
been a bad team. So like the Islanders, let's say they've been like terrible or anything. They're only 4 points back of the Flyers, but
but
at every point where the Islanders have had the chance to kind of catch the Flyers or catch the teams ahead of them, they've stumbled. So we'll see where it goes. I
yeah,
mean, it'll be interesting, definitely.
they have an easier, at least in the short term. I don't know their schedule overall, but they have an easier schedule coming up than the
Yeah,
Flyers.
I've seen
So
that as well.
that is something that definitely concerns me. Is we're playing a lot more high end teams of late than they will. Like we're going to be playing Toronto,
What
Tampa
I,
Bay,
yeah,
Florida.
what I will say though is the Islanders are on a 4 game winning streak. So sometimes there's two ends of that tail where you win five and you lose two or three in a row or something like that. So that could, maybe they're coming into a downside. Who knows? Or it could be a longer win streak, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, the Islanders, I'm just looking at their schedule and yeah, they're not playing the best of teams coming up. Like they
No, they're
play
not.
the Sharks and Ducks next, then the Kings, and then they play the Sabres, Senators. And then they do play the Rangers, Hurricanes, Red Wings, Jets, Devils, Panthers. So it gets a little tougher after that.
Yeah, so we'll see, and I'm sure the Flyers are their bulk of their tougher games are right now. Ironically, when they have their most injured group, so we'll see. Again, the Flyers have been able to beat top teams before, just not with this
Yeah.
little defensive support.
And
That's the
I
thing
would
that concerns me.
say, I would say too, now with just Walker getting traded and the defense kind of being a lot younger of a group, getting that win against Ottawa, getting at least a point against St. Louis, that's crucial here, right? Because
Yeah,
if you don't get those 3 points, the Islanders are essentially just a point behind you.
yeah.
So then it's with 2 games in
The
hand. So
Blues
it's
did us no favors. They lost against the Islanders in regulation,
yeah.
and took a point from us in overtime.
It's a tough one to lose for sure,
Yes.
especially in the shootout with such a great game from Urson. But that's really when you miss a guy like a Travis Konechny. I think, if you have a Konechny like that in that game, maybe it's possible. He scores for you come through very clutch so far this season. But I also, I mean, I will criticize John Tortorella in the sense that I don't like the way that they started the overtimes, like with defensive first forwards. Like you need to win that game. Why aren't you putting out Morgan Frost and Owen Tippett who might score?
I think
Well, not to say that Cates, when a Paling won't, but who's having the better chance of scoring goals for you in a 3-on-3
or
situation?
mix it up a little bit where you have like Paling with Tippett,
Frost or something.
or
Yeah.
yeah, or Frost with Cates, right? Like I don't know. And again, like Sean Couturier didn't touch overtime, and
And he has overtime game winners this season.
yeah.
Put him
So
out there in the most crucial situation, right? And see what he can produce for you. So
yeah. So I guess with that, a little bit of news here is that Travis Konechny is now no longer wearing a no contact jersey. It is speculated that he will be back against Florida. There is actually even speculation maybe they even held him out against the Blues, thinking they didn't need him as much for that game, just to give him a little bit extra rest. I think that absolutely could be possible. It looks like Konechny probably will be back against Florida. I actually expect a good amount of line changes for this next game to try to recalibrate. And we don't even know what's going on with Johansson, and I don't think they're
Yeah.
going to jump to insert him in the lineup or anything. But there's going to be kind of like a numbers game
I
here, and
wonder. Oh, I was gonna say, I wonder like if they put Connecting Couturier back together.
pot-
I wouldn't be
potentially,
surprised to see that, like Brink, Couturier, Konechny, you keep together Frost, Tippett.
yeah, because
I could definitely see
there's
that.
been a nice chemistry there with Farabee and Tippett and
Lawton and
Lawton,
Forster
yeah,
have
and
had a good
I'm
line
sorry,
going.
Forster, and then Tippett with Frost, which we talked about, has been really good. I still look. I like that third line of Hathaway. I don't see it as a viable long term option. I might be in complete isolation there. I
It's a really
don't.
good fourth line.
Yeah, it's like yeah. I
They
think
just don't
Noah.
score enough, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I really I truly believe that Noah Cates should be playing with Sean Couturier. I haven't been wrong about many of the stuff that I've said about the lineup. Let's put it that way. I think they should go with Noah Cates, Sean Couturier, and Travis Konechny. They
I
have
could
yet
see
to
that.
try that combination. They really should go for it. Paling, Hathaway can stick together. I would put Cam Atkinson with them on that fourth line for now, potentially, or Bobby Brink, one of those combinations. But um, there's a numbers game here right now. So we'll see what the lines end up being. Again, TK has to be healthy for that and get the full green light, but I have a feeling we're gonna hear that.
Yeah.
Probably
And where
as you're
Johansson
listening.
slots in, that'll be interesting.
Yeah,
If he stays.
yeah, we'll see. I suspect he probably will be staying. At least for this season. And I don't know if they're going to jump to put him in the lineup anyway. But that might be true. But you know, I there's still Lixell here,
What
who I think is easy to sit, and then Delorier, who the coach loves.
yeah.
But I don't think you played Delorier against Florida. I think you look
No.
to
Well,
add scores in
I
that game.
agree. I think what they do, or what I could definitely see them do, is especially with Cam Atkinson just being a black hole offensively. Like I don't think he's put up any points. He's been reinserted here.
Yeah.
I could see Atkinson come out for a Johansson. Maybe. Maybe they
Yeah.
think he can provide more offense.
It's possible. I think that's possible too. There's also news on Lawton and York. So Lawton had a sick day today. He wasn't at practice. And then York was given a maintenance day today.
After the seven
Uh,
blocks or eight blocks he had, what was it in the other?
7.
Yeah, he might have needed it, I think.
Well, my tweet actually did really well because people talk about Seeler. Nobody realized that York had two
Yeah, I
more
know.
blocks than Seeler in that game.
I noticed because I have him in fantasy, so
Oh, there
he's
you go.
helping me out that
Well, I
night.
just think York is truly evolving to be a true top pairing defenseman. I think his offensive game is going to come in to play too, and I expect
Yeah.
him to be a 50-point defenseman playing 23 minutes,
I
24 minutes a
think,
night.
to be honest, I think
I think we're going to see that right
yeah,
now.
I
Actually,
agree, but I just want to state that I think people really underestimated his defensive game and didn't realize how solid he was as an actual defender.
yeah,
Because I think when you're playing on that USN TDP team that's breaking records and scoring all these goals, nobody's looking at defense. They're just looking at
I
offensive
agree. Well, they didn't
production.
need to play that hard because they were so much better than every other
Yeah, exactly.
team.
But
They
like,
were
you
dominant.
got to think about it this way, right? Like, York's played essentially against top lines all season because he's been a top pairing defenseman with Sandine for majority of the year. So he's showing the ability to, shut down other teams' top lines and other teams' top power plays because he's also playing top PK minutes as
Yeah,
well. So defensively, he's very, he's holding his own, and he's able to shut down some of the, best players on the other teams. And he's very young still. He's only 23, so that's only going to improve. And you look at offensively, right? Like he's got 9 goals and 13 assists. So 22 points in 63 games. And he hasn't looked the greatest offensively. And he's, hasn't really put up much points on the power play. So you'd imagine that would improve as well as he continues to
as the
develop.
power play becomes competent.
Yeah, that as well. So like I could
Our power
totally,
play
like I said,
stinks.
I can totally see him, be getting into that 40, 50 point range a year and being really solid defensively. And York, you know what he's kind of reminding me of? Not like stylistically the way he plays and breaks up plays, but just in terms of like overall reliability, a guy that's really good defensively, a guy that can move the puck for you, a guy you can put on the power play, though he might not be your number one option there right now or down the line. Like you can put him there and he'd be adequate. He's reminding me kind of like of a Chemo Timonen in the sense
Yeah,
that he's
absolutely.
he's not the biggest guy or anything. Like he's not a guy that is jumping off the page offensively, but he can make that real good first stretch pass, can rush the ice up. He has good offensive skills, and is also really really solid in his own
Yeah,
end.
and Timonen took until I think age 24, 25 to break out offensively.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
was not
For
putting up
Orc,
like
it's
big numbers.
coming a lot
Yeah,
quicker too.
I think
So
it's going to be very similar. Where Timonen was a number one defenseman. He was more of a top pairing defenseman.
yeah.
But he was like arguably the best number two defenseman in the NHL when he
Whereas I
played for
could
the
see York
Blues.
having a similar type of value.
Yes, that's what I see him too. I don't see him as like being Kale McCarr or
But
Hedman or
really good on
Yossi.
a top pair for the next
Yes,
decade.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ryan Ellis type of guy, like a guy who you can play in all situations. If you don't have a number one defenseman, you can rely on him heavily. I mean, that is what Travis Sanheim has evolved into as well.
Yeah.
People might be in denial about it, and that's something that kind of frustrates me. I keep hearing that like Seeler Walker are the best pairing on the Flyers, but it's like they don't have the toughest assignments. If that's
Yeah.
actually true, the coaching staff wouldn't be giving majority of minutes to Sanheim and York. They're
Yeah.
obviously the top two defensemen. They've
And
obviously played the best. Um,
and
they're the most
Sanheim's on
talented.
track, right, to hit a 50-point season. Like
Yes.
he's at 37 points. I would imagine he'll hit 13 points before the end of the year.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that he'll hit 50. And like I said in the beginning I said this in the press box, I said this on the podcast. I knew he would be a big impact. This is his time.
Yeah.
And again, people talk about Jacob Chikrin. He's going to be 26 by the end of this month. And like that's a guy who's going to be entering his kind of maturity time. So if the Flyers trade for him, it's not that different than having
Yeah.
Travis Sanheim on your team. So it's like,
And speaking of Chikrin, I've seen a tweet online from the fourth period's Anthony DeMarco, and he essentially stated that there's been trade talks between Ottawa and the Flyers, but nothing imminent or nothing
I
kind of on the horizon, which
I
is what
can't
we
see
would
that being an
expect.
in season for either. Like the Flyers are in no rush to make that trade.
Exactly. Why would
So
you be, right? So,
yeah, that seems more of like, hey, we're trying to figure out our rosters for the following year. You guys are trying to remove Chikrin. We need to add a defenseman. We want to
mhm.
remove, like, I don't know if they're interested in Ristolainen, though I do know they want a right-handed defenseman. That might be a money swap, but the Flyers add, so it's Risto plus a first, plus a prospect type of thing for Jacob Chikrin. I could see something like that happening.
Yeah.
Again, do not count out people's value in Rasmus Ristolainen. I know people like want to pretend like he has none,
Hey,
but
being a right shot big defenseman in the NHL ultimately drives your value up even before
yeah,
the conversation begins. It's
I'll
just
be
the
honest
nature
with
of
you.
it.
Like, I mean, would they say no to a first Andrea and Risto?
Probably not,
Probably
considering
not.
that I don't think the player wants to stay there anyway.
Right,
So,
exactly. So you might
like
be able to
you're,
offer even less.
yeah.
You
And
might be addered.
another thing to mention that we didn't really bring up, but I guess a comparable for Sealer. Just if you saw Luke Shen's deal that he got in
Yeah,
the
yeah, that's
summer.
exactly what I was thinking.
So
Two seven five.
he got yeah 3 years, 2.75 mil. Sealer gets 4 years,
And
2.7.
Luke is older, isn't he?
Yeah, Luke's 33, and
Yeah,
Sealer, yeah, he'll be 31 by the time it kicks in the contract.
yeah.
So
So
pretty similar value for
yeah,
that type
it's
of D man, right?
pretty standard. I think people are just in shock that Sealer is good. You know what I mean? But he has. The reality is, it's not just this season. He played well last season
Yep,
too. People were just in denial about it. And then this season, he took his game up even another level. And he had a really good partner as opposed to just being paired with whoever was around.
pretty
Right.
much. Just
So,
getting rotated partners pretty
yeah,
much
we're good.
all year
I
last season.
promise you, you will feel him being missed against Florida. Like, you
Nobody's
will
blocking
notice
shots like
him
him,
and
that's for
Walker.
sure.
You will notice that they are not around.
Yeah.
It will be noticeable. So I guess the other thing is I don't really want to go into the games because we've talked a lot this episode already. But the Flyers did beat the Sens 4-2. They lost to the Blues 2-1 in a shootout. I do want to talk about specific performances. First one I want to talk about is Felix Sandstrom. You and I both called this out. Again, I am a bigger fan of Felix Sandstrom than 99% of fans, as I can
As am
tell.
I.
I think he was helped out a little bit, but I don't think it's his fault that the Flyers let Ottawa pressure him that much. But he had it probably the best game out of a backup this season that wasn't Carter Hart or Ayerson.
Yeah.
I thought he put on a solid performance. He wasn't incredible. He had some really good saves. When the Flyers needed a big save, he gave it to them. And look, they say that the post is a goalie's best friend for a reason. He kind of forced some of those saves. He got pieces of some that hit the post.
Yeah.
He outplayed his
Well,
competition, took
hey,
home the victory. I think it's a really good sign.
no, it's great for him and great for his confidence, right? Because how many games last season where the Flyers in where it was a close game and like they choked away and he was in net and they didn't get the win. And you kind of almost felt like that might have happened in that Ottawa game, right? Like Ottawa was pressuring, they were hitting a lot of posts. They had some of the better to play. Like the Flyers obviously weren't on their best in terms of like having their A game against the Senators, right?
Yeah.
Like, and they still found a way to win with Sandstrom in net, and he didn't let that weak goal in that, I mean, was kind of not his trademark, but there was a lot of times last season where, the Flyers would need that big save to kind of keep themselves in the game, and he let that weak one in, and then it kind of spirals from there, and that did not happen.
Right.
And I think that's the main thing, right? Like you get that first win, build that confidence up and see where you can kind of take it. And I've always liked Sandstrom's skill set in the sense that he's a very athletic goaltender. He can make those big saves. Sometimes the positioning is where he'll have that mental
Right.
lapse.
Exactly.
Um, so I think this is just a great thing for his confidence in general because a confident goalie uh, plays better almost 100% of the time. So
Yeah.
to have a guy in Sandstrom that believes he can win at the NHL level, that will be helpful for the Flyers when you have to put him in again. And
Yeah.
I think ultimately, I mean, my perception of it at the beginning of the season was Sandstrom was always the better option than Peterson.
Yeah.
Even
Same.
for what I saw in preseason, he played way better than Peterson in the preseason. So that should have given him the
I
opportunity before him,
I
in my
still
opinion. But
to that point, I was still confused why everybody was counting him out from playing any games. I was like, I see no signs. I saw a guy start off poorly last year, but rebound really strong, get some
yeah,
wins at the end of the season, and then have a good preseason and then get nothing out of it.
yeah.
And Peterson, I get why they called him up first. Again, you want to try to salvage that contract too. This is what I talk about with Joe Hansen. You want to try to salvage that contract first before you give
Because
up on the
goalies are
guy.
valuable, right? Like teams
Right.
need goalies. If you eat some of that money, maybe you could have traded him down the line if
Yeah.
he does look to be a
I
competent
And
backup,
I
right?
think Sandstrom and Peterson suffer from the same problem. They're both athletic goalies. They're both capable of making a good save, but their positioning and stability is not there where somebody like Erson is.
Yeah,
But Sandstrom is a little bit younger. He's also Swedish. I wonder if there could be, he's also been a teammate with Erson back in the day as a 1-2 punch, and Sandstrom played well. He didn't
yeah,
always play poorly in for the Phantoms. Like that is not, it's not like
yeah.
every year he's been bad for the Phantoms. So I wonder if there could be something there where the two of them kind of become a duo.
Yeah, I
Speaking
thought it was
speaking
interesting.
speaking Swedish if you need to. You know what I
Well,
mean?
I saw the other day, I think they were entering the arena to go to the game, and it was the three Swedes together was Sandstrom, Lixell, and Urson, right? Like, and people say
And
that
now
stuff doesn't
Yinning
play.
too.
Yeah, no, Yenning as well, but people say it doesn't play a factor, but like it definitely does, right? Just
I
being
think so.
in comfortability and things like that. I mean, I think Sandstrom's always had the skill to be an NHL backup. Just the consistency hasn't been there, and that's kind of what the Flyers have wanted to see from him.
Yeah.
This is really his shot, right? Like this is probably one of his last shots to prove that he can be an NHL backup goaltender. So
Yeah.
I expect him to take it seriously and try to seize it. So that's obviously I mean, that was the same situation with Peterson, but I just think Sandstrom is younger, and I just like the skill set more as just somebody who has played the position. I just think that there's an ability for Sandstrom to come up with bigger saves at bigger times for the Flyers than a guy like Peterson can at this point in his career.
Yeah. I think so too. All right. Next topic we had. So this was just something I was thinking about, like assuming that TK is healthy. You did mention playing him with Coots. One thing I want to see is Forrester, TK, and Tippett on different lines. Um,
Yeah, which
I
effectively that could be if they put Coots and him together.
Right, and that's why I kind of want to see that because it does leave a goal scorer on each one of those top nine lines, and it does allow you to kind of spread out. And, again, if you keep that paling line together and they're still playing really well, hopefully you can get every line going. Like the Flyers have enough depth here
Yeah.
offensively to create that scenario. And I wonder, like, is this an opportunity now to do that where TK's been out, the other lines have found chemistry, they were able to score without him being in there.
It'll,
Forrester and Farabee have chemistry.
and Lawton's been good
Yeah,
in the middle with them. So
right. And again, you could throw TK back up there with Frost and Tippett. But then again, you have both goal scorers on the same line. I don't feel like Tippett necessarily
I,
needs TK.
well, yeah. I think it's interesting. Like you mentioned Cates with Couturier and
That would be
Konechny.
my line, dude.
But I think they might try that, and I would be open to it because I think Cates as your F1 on the wing, retrieving the pucks for Couturier and Konechny, you kind of open them up for a lot more scoring
Yep.
opportunities. And also Cates and Konechny have chemistry playing together from last season, just because he was kind of his first line center
Yeah.
for most of the season. So there's a familiarity there. But also if that doesn't work, I mean, we also saw Frost, Cates, and Tippett be a real strong line to end the season a couple of years back. So I wouldn't be against them trying that. And then instead you have Brink on the line with Couturier and Konechny too. And
Sure.
then you keep intact, Lawton, Forster, and Farabee there. And then
Farabee.
you can have your fourth line of like, Hathaway, Paling, and Delorier or whatever you want to have, or Johansson or Atkinson or
Yeah.
whoever, I
What I
guess.
think we'll probably see is TK back with Frost and Tippett, and then Couturier still on the fourth line with Cam
Uh,
Atkinson and
Personally,
Brink or
I disagree. Like I
I
mean,
hope I'm wrong.
yeah, I think okay, Couturier. I mean, he's
I
been
don't think he
under
should be on the fourth
He's
line anymore.
been, yeah, he's been underwhelming offensively, but also, I mean, you're not giving him the best of line mates to play with in that situation. You're limiting his minutes. I also just think he's looked better the last handful of games. Like
Yes.
the skating's been better. I think his passing's been better. He's been getting to those areas like front of the net into the slot where those goals are going to get scored and those opportunities are going to get created. So I think now's the time. Like, whether you want to say you're arresting him or not, or he was earning that or whatever they want to say, like, he's your captain. He's played in these situations down, the stretch before. You need him to lead now and kind of show it on the ice during an important period for your team. So I
Yeah.
think you gotta increase the minutes, even if it's only to like 16, 17 minutes or whatever. Like you don't have to go overboard and play him 22 minutes a night or anything, but you at least need to give him 16, 17 minutes versus the 12 minutes he's been getting at this
Yeah.
point.
And we haven't been playing as many games in a row now, so it's like he is getting some like time off in between.
Yeah.
So, I see that. And let's just talk with it together because this is all kind of related, but like I see people just completely give up on Atkinson. Like again, you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with Vasili. Everybody's allowed to have their own opinions. We're just on the outside talking here, but I'm a little shocked with the lack of grace given to two guys who missed so much time. Like
Yeah.
I believe I saw some like take the C away from Coots.
That's
Just
crazy. But when you're online, I don't
but
take anything away from anybody, man.
exact and it's like guys, Atkinson missed an entire season.
Yeah.
Coots missed two. Like this is significant amount of
And
time.
yeah, and it's not also a coincidence that you're seeing them break down and not look as effective at the end point of a season when they haven't played in so long. And they were getting like, there was a point at the beginning of the year where for a 10-20 game period, Atkinson and Couture were playing 19-20 minutes a night each night.
Yeah.
That takes a toll when you haven't played, for a long period of time after a 60 game stretch in a regular season when, the NHL schedule is taxing, right, on the body, and especially on guys who are a little bit older and guys that haven't played in a long time. So I think for Atkinson, he hasn't looked good. I mean, he hasn't had any offensive production at all, but he's not a defensive liability. So, you can at least have him in on the fourth line or something. Or if you think he's really like struggling in terms of, the energy levels, things like that, now that you have a guy like a Johansson and you have Delorier in there, you can kind of do a rotation. Hey, like Atkinson can't play, a 3 game and 4 night stretch. He just doesn't have the energy to do it and play his best hockey. Well, let's take him out for a game or two. Let's put him back in, next week or something. I could totally see something like that happening for him.
Yeah. I just think the lines need to change a little bit. They're some of them are fine. Actually, all but the Couturier line, I feel like is just being underutilized. And
Yeah,
this is not a team that can afford to just bury
I
Couturier. He's our number one center. So
I
we
totally
have to get him
agree.
out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I think that is what Tortorella is doing. I'm not actually shitting on what Tortorella is doing. It's tough for me to watch, but he's done it to other players.
Yeah.
Has been
I
effective.
think he's disguising it in a sense saying, oh, you get what you earn, but in the back of their minds, they're kind of like, well, he needs a break a little
I
bit.
mean, they were
And this is
giving him
how,
nights off like periodically
yeah,
early in the
yeah.
season.
I think they definitely recognize it. I think for Atkinson, like, I don't know if at this point, at least offensively, he is a guy you want to have on your second line. Third line, fourth line, sure. I just don't know for the rest of the season what he's going to look like offensively. Whereas, like, you've seen Atkinson get days off now, get put back in there, and he hasn't shown like a same resurgence. Where like Couturier, you've taken some minutes away and you're seeing his play improve.
I've actually seen over the past couple games where I'm like, if he had a better line mate, that would have been a goal.
Yeah,
And I like Lixell. I just don't think he's necessarily ready to be putting up points in the NHL on a regular basis. And why not have a bunch of guys that you can actually play?
yeah. I think Brink and Konechny, let's say if you were going to center those two between him as well, or Cates for that matter, like I think those are good wingers to have for a guy like Couturier,
Well, you
especially
take
since
the pre
their speed to their games
with
though, right?
yeah, oh
So
no, absolutely. I just think with Cates, like you take some of the defensive pressure off of Couturier with
yeah,
Cates, some of those board battles,
try to
and
get
let
more
him get it.
into offensive groove.
Exactly. Where Paling is a workhorse at this point. He's in the best shape of his life. The guy can skate. Majority of his goals are on the shorthand. You know, you keep him with Hathaway. You can put Atkinson with them on the fourth line. I think that would be interesting. I just think there has to be some kind of shift here because we're going to be playing really tough teams. We have to get all four lines going. They're like
Yeah,
burying guys on the fourth line. I get it. And I get like the Lawton thing, but like Lawton's not a true number one center. Keep him there. He's playing well. I'm not saying he should be demoted or something, but like, you know, like let's be serious. We have to get Couturier going. By the if we want to make the playoffs, we got to get him going. And I think putting it with TK and putting it with
yeah,
Coots is a really, or I'm sorry, putting it with Cates and TK. I think you give him every benefit there. Be like,
yeah,
hey, he's gonna dig the pucks for you. He's amazing back checker. TK is a complete fucking X factor. Get back on your game. Paling and Hathaway are going to keep doing their thing, and we can always throw another winger outside of Cates on that
yeah,
line. They're not going to be bad with
yeah,
a different winger there. Even Bobby
exactly.
Brink, like I don't know. I just think it's something they need to explore.
No, I totally agree, and I think for Couturier, he would probably even recognize that he needs to probably step it up offensively in a
Yeah, and
sense.
I think he's been trying. I've actually seen some opportunities where I'm like, oh, like get him the goddamn puck. He's wide open. There was a
I
few of
didn't,
them where
yeah,
I was like, there was
exactly.
one where he's just in the slot by himself, just waiting for a one timer, nobody around him, and they just couldn't get him the puck. And I'm like, guys, we gotta get him out of his funk. We gotta give him
And
opportunities to wind up and
to his
shoot.
credit, he's looked pretty good on the power plays, like making some setups, some slick backhand
Yeah.
passes. So like I think he's getting back into form for
That
sure.
shootout flub hurt me a
That
little bit.
that did suck, but I think if he would have made the movie, would have scored. It looked like he
I
kind of had him
know,
beat there.
hopped off his stick, and we lost that fucking game. All right, let's get into our final topic. We'll wrap it up. We're going pretty long on this one, though I expected it. So big news, Denver Barkey, and we did have some inside word about this. We kind of found out pretty much right after we recorded our last episode, so we knew that this was coming. But
Yeah,
Denver Barkey signed his ELC. Comes in. I think he's fifth overall in points in the OHL, or maybe that's point per game, but he's in that top five range. He is having a phenomenal year in the OHL. Again, I don't expect him in the NHL next year or something like that, but
yeah,
he is absolutely showing that he should have been a late first round pick, at least a second round pick guy. Shouldn't have been taken in the third round. Flyers clearly winning out on this, and Denver Barkey signs the LC, which congrats to him. That's awesome. I'm thoroughly excited, and maybe that Braden Point future is possible. Who knows? Because he does seem to have a much higher upside than people assumed. And that could just keep growing. I mean, he still
Yeah.
looks like a child. So anytime I see that, I
There's
like
got to
think,
be a lot of physical maturity there for him,
right.
obviously, to make the step to the next level. But I mean,
Well,
it's
let me ask this question before you
sure.
go into that. Please state your thoughts on Barkey, but also when do you think him and Bonk will be coming over to the Phantoms? And you can
Um,
add that in at the end there.
Yeah, so I think actually I'll answer that right off the bat. I mean, I think
Okay.
Barkey is definitely going back to juniors after
Okay.
this. I think Bonk's on the fence. I could see Bonk potentially making the jump because he'll be able to play in the AHL next season. I just think what it has to do is Bonk seems like he's more physically mature than a
Sure.
Barkey at this point, and I think
I would
that's a
say
big
definitely.
factor where like
Definitely.
do you want let's it depends though, right? Like if Bark has a huge summer training and he gets more physically mature as he goes into camp next season, which is totally possible, maybe there's a bit of a change and a bit of a shift in the thinking. I just think, the AHL is a very physical league. If you're gonna have a young guy like that who's very small in that league, not, kind of ready to take the bruises and the bumps that come with it. You don't, the last thing you want to do for a young player in development is hamper the development because of injury. And it's because you put them in a league they might not have been physically ready to endure. So I don't know if the Flyers want to do that. But that being said, they do really like him and they kept him around pretty long last year before they sent him back. So who knows? But I think the safe bet would be probably both of them go back and the season afterwards, right? So not 24, 25, but 25, 26. I would say is probably a safe bet for both of them. And just for the ELC, I mean, the kid's obviously earned it, right? Like he's one of the top scorers in the OHL. He's obviously outplaying his detractors or showing things that people didn't think that he had within his game. Because if he played this way in the past, I mean, he would have probably been, a late first round pick. I think the size has a lot to do with it. Like undersized forwards are always going to drop in NHL drafts, just is what it is. Because you can't really teach size, right? Like if you're physically mature and ready to make it to the next level, that's already a notch on your belt versus Barkey's going to have to go through that to get to that point. And just in terms of like the contract breaking, yeah, like we had sources, kind of inside sources telling us that, this was going to happen a couple of weeks ago. We didn't break it. Typically, we want to kind of respect players and, their privacy and things like that. So we're not, a podcast that really
We don't care
cares
about breaking
about
news, to be
breaking,
honest.
an entry level contract or doing something like that. That's just not what we do. Though we do get the insight in the news. So, maybe down the line we'll bring it up. But yeah,
Yeah. So I'm a little bit torn. So like here's my thought. I agree with your assessment, right? The safe bet, send them both to the OHL, especially depending on how they're playoff. They're obviously going to be in the playoffs or one of the best teams in the OHL.
could win the Mortal Cup, right? They went all the
So
way last season.
right, yeah, absolutely. I hope they do. Actually, I hope they go the distance. That'd be awesome because we can watch them too. So I have two schools of thought there. One, how much more can they achieve? Right now, Barkey is on a 1.57, almost 1.6 points per game, right? Like talent wise, like offensive production wise, that's already like excessively high, right? It's very high. It's first round pick type of caliber production.
Yeah.
Okay. If he goes back again, he's probably gonna exceed that. Okay, but that means the league is a little bit easy for him.
Yep.
Mind you, he's on a good line as well with Cowan, right? He's also producing at a high clip. Same thing with Bonk, right? He's kind of dominating his league, both of them. Maybe that's a consequence of the team they're on, but they're both putting up like pretty high numbers there. And I look at that and I go, okay, yes, you can, but you can also bring them in house, develop them, test them against men. I also look at, and I agree with the physical thing. I think you're absolutely right about what you said. Everything I think you said was astute. The only other thing that I can think of is that one player he reminds me of that's part of this organization is Travis Konechny. And that is a
Barkey, right? Yeah.
guy that we thought would take a while, who excelled immensely.
And
Uh,
came in
it-
right away, essentially.
he shocked us. He was physically small, right? We didn't even play him in the AHL. He just jumped right into the NHL, right? He gave us like everybody's like, this is a no-brainer. He's obviously the best player here.
Yeah.
And I think there's some element of that where we saw that with Barkey, where he lasted much longer than we
Well,
expected in preseason.
he has great hockey sense. Like just from watching him in those games, he just knew where to be on the ice all the
Right.
time.
So maybe there's an element of them going, well, he could get another year, right? It's not going to hurt him to be in the OHL,
Yeah.
but maybe the kid is ready to get play against pros. You know, if he can fit in a top six role, which I think he potentially can on this Phantoms team, you know, I look at that and I think that opportunity is there for him. Now, I could just be getting excited, but he does remind me of connecting in so many ways that I'm like, and connecting when I'm writing the NHL, I'm like, we're just looking at asking this guy to do the AHL, and the two of them are teammates. I don't know. It's just a thought I had in my head.
Yeah.
The
The
safe pick is what
only
you're saying,
but
without a
the
doubt.
only thing I caveat is that that 19-year-old, like that weird rule. He's 18, and his birthday is April 27th. So I don't know what the age will be where he might have to just make the NHL. He might not even be eligible
Oh yeah,
for the
you might be
AHL.
right because I don't see
Um,
them rushing him into the NHL. That I
no,
do,
that's what I
unless he like
mean.
blows everybody away.
Yeah.
It's possible he does that, but being undersized, like let's be
Because
honest,
I don't think 19-year-olds, if I'm not
I thought
mistaken,
it was 19 for the AHL.
I think you got to be 20.
Is it
19 you
20?
can't.
Did it
No,
change
he's
on me?
18. He's 18. So he wouldn't, yeah, I don't think he would be eligible as of next year. It's either NHL or not, basically.
But he's gonna be 19 in April,
Yeah, he's going to be 19 in
so
April.
he'll be 19. But you're saying it's 20 to go to the AHL.
Yes, exactly.
Is that confirmed, or are we assuming?
We're assuming, but I'm pretty
Okay,
sure. I'm pretty
okay.
sure.
I don't know if you're right or wrong. I don't remember. I remembered it being 19. But I absolutely could be wrong. Like it's not something I looked up prior to this and confirmed. But if that is the case, then yeah, no way he's gonna be playing in the
Yeah.
minors. I can't see them rushing him into the NHL. I'll make that very clear. Him and Bunk, either one of them. I do not see playing in the NHL next year.
I'm searching it up. Yeah, a player must be at least 18 years of age to play in the AHL or not currently be beholden to a junior ice hockey team.
Yeah,
So
but what's
yeah,
there's a juniors rule.
yeah, so that's what the rule is. He would technically still be a property of a junior team at 19, so they won't allow him.
But it says
He'd either have to make the NHL.
I
Uh,
thought it was you can be 18 if you're not in juniors or 19 if you're part of a junior
yeah, so
team.
the NHL CHL agreement states all 18 and 19-year-old players not retained by their NHL squad must be returned to
Okay, so it is so
their
it's
team.
20. Okay, so
Yeah.
it's 20. All right. So my theory is wrong anyway. Okay. So at least we got that clarified here. So he won't be old enough, but I do expect him to get a very long look
And that'll be
in
the same with
preseason.
Bonk too, I guess.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I doubt he's also going to be 20. No.
No, he's the same age. Yeah, same
Okay, so we
draft.
can expect them most likely. I had somebody commenting on like, oh, he'll be on the Flyers next year. It's like
I don't know about that.
I
Yeah.
don't I don't I don't see either one of
I
them
think two
making the
seasons from
NHL.
now is my prediction,
Yeah,
potentially.
and you look at that, with the Michkov timeline and
Makes a lot of sense, yeah. To
yeah,
integrate them at that point.
yeah, and that's when you're gonna have to look at guy like Atkinson will be gone at that point. Coots will probably be the only real veteran that would be above
Him,
30 at that
him,
point.
yeah, Konechny. Well, actually, not even Konechny will be
Connecting won't
close
be
to
30.
30. Yeah.
Right. So it's like it's really just gonna be Coots. Everybody else will be probably under because like Delorier will probably be gone by then. Hathaway will be gone. Um Lawton potentially. I think he'll probably
Yeah,
get traded at the end of his contract.
I agree. Yeah.
I doubt they're gonna give him a long term like finish your career with the Flyers thing. So
Yeah.
okay, and the last piece of news, and we'll end it on this. We don't need to dig too deep. So the Athletic released rankings. Last time we told you that Michkov was ranked fifth and Gauthier was number one by Craig Button. We found that laughable, but the Athletic released their own rankings, and they had Michkov as first overall, where he rightly deserves to be. I did see Gabriel Perreault as number two and Will Smith as three. I don't think. Look, I think these NCAA guys have had great years. You have to realize they're playing with an immense amount of talent around them. They're playing against other college students. I don't know if Gabriel Perot is the second best prospect in the league. Let's put it that way. I don't think he would have dropped to where he did in the draft without
If
having
he was the
shortcomings
second
in his
best,
game.
yeah.
Right. I haven't watched him closely. I still think he's a very valuable prospect, but I think these rankings are pretty much bullshit. The only thing that I know that just based off of what is going on, Michkov is the best prospect outside of the NHL. Like that, I think is
That's
clear cut.
concrete. Yeah.
And I think when he gets here,
Well,
he's gonna blow everybody's socks off.
yeah, I mean, it's obviously great to see Scott Wheeler put that list up because it kind of affirms what most of us are already kind of know and what we're thinking, right? Like we know Michkov has put up great production for his age, and in a pro league, and nobody's really done it for over 20 years, essentially, other than all the best, Russian players to come into the KHL that have essentially made their way to the NHL. So, great company. I have a quote from Michkov actually, because his season ended. So I just thought it was interesting to
It's
read out.
The Scott quote.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
I believe so. But he essentially said, "I'm currently on vacation. I'll be back soon and start prepping for a new season. It's important for me to always keep myself in great shape and be ready for all games. I always prefer to go step by step. There will soon be a tournament with the national team in May. I want to show my best hockey there and be the main player for SKA next year. I
Yeah.
still have a 2-year contract with the Army team, and all I can think about is this. I always try to be focused on work because only such a situation can lead to success and help achieve the goals that I dream of." So obviously he's saying, he wants to be a top player on SKA. I don't think that really gives us any new news. Like
No.
he's a competitive kid. Of course, he's gonna want to be the top guy on SKA. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I just also like people that kind of were like, oh, this kid's work ethic isn't there, and he's cocky and all this, and like from just seeing the quote, like he seems determined to me, man. Like
Yeah.
just every quote, every media release I see from the kid, he just seems like he's very
Well,
determined.
I again, dude, it's in my opinion, all Russian biased. Nothing stated about Gautier at all. He's the one who ends up having problems.
Yeah,
Everything stated about Michkov, literally nothing.
the kid seems like
If
a
anything, dealing
workhorse to
with his
me.
father passing away, dealing with being underappreciated,
Yeah,
he's having the exact opposite experience where Gautier is getting all the praise and all that comment. Mishkov's not getting it. He's being underappreciated everywhere,
yeah.
even by his own team. And again, I just don't buy it. I cannot wait for this kid to get here.
It's
Um,
gonna be awesome to see him
I
on the
know
NHL
I'm
ice.
like worried that I'm building him up too much now, where I'm kind of like, he's still, there's always a risk. I'm so excited, but there's always a risk with prospects.
Of course, of
Every
course.
time. There's always a chance that he's not
I
the
would
guy we thought
say,
he
I
was going to
mean,
be.
I don't know. I've watched hockey for a long time. I've seen a lot of prospects come and
He's
go. I would
incredible.
say he's about the closest thing to a lock like that I've seen, since the generational type of guys. Like you get a Stamkos, you get a McDavid, you get a Cross. Like he just seems like he's those one of those types of lock prospects just based
Yeah.
on all the factors. So
Well, the one thing I find funny is I was looking over his scouting report and they were saying that he doesn't have explosive speed. How much you want to bet that that's not true? Like
yeah,
how much you want to bet that he's a burner when he
but I've
gets here?
watched him play a lot and he seems really quick out there. So I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Dude, I like don't trust anything anymore. I'm like, this kid is just killing it.
But it's also just like I don't know how many like these prospect reporting people like how many games are they watching of this kid?
And
Like
also,
and then making the assessment.
how long ago was that assessment?
That's because nobody can even get into Rush to actually watch the kid live
And
anyway.
yeah, they can only
So
watch him on streams.
yeah, I don't know.
Like,
That's what I mean. Like it's all just like it's a very strange time, obviously, to be a Russian hockey prospect. I think it's
yes,
probably, if you're in that kind of system in Russia, like it's actually probably a big detriment to your career at this
yeah.
point,
I'm kind of hoping
unfortunately.
Zamula is still here when he comes over because I think it is best to have another Russian speaking player here.
Even if he isn't, I think the Flyers
No,
are
I think,
aware of that.
yeah, of
They'll
course.
probably get, they'll
They're
probably
gonna.
trade for somebody
Yeah.
or
Well,
do something.
I don't know if they'll do that. They'll have somebody accommodate for him, but I think it's always good when you have like
Yeah.
somebody on the ice, on the
Hey,
bench who can
we'll see,
translate.
right? We'll see who the Flyers draft in the first round. Maybe they get another
Well,
Russian and
Kolosov.
yeah, Kolosov as well.
Yeah,
But
he might end up being the backup goal. He might be the backup goalie next year for all we know. I
I
doubt
could
it, but
I could see it for
with the
sure.
lack of
But
goaltending depth with Carter Hart gone now,
yeah,
and the fact Peterson's locked up for so much money,
who knows? Who
Banster might not
knows?
be here next year. I think they're going to start Kolosov in the minors. I think that's the
Yeah.
smart move with the goalie, but um, we'll see what happens. All right, let's cut it at that. This has been a really long one. We're at 2 hours, just over 2 hours, so not too bad. Vasili, anything you want to leave people with?
No, just to continue to check out flyersnitty-gritty.com. Tons of articles and content coming out there. I'll have articles this weekend kind of breaking down the trade deadline from the Flyers perspective, so keep an eye out there.
Cool. Again, just want to remind everybody, please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, follow us on iTunes and Spotify, give us a ratings there. Again, we really, really appreciate it. Again, if you're enjoying this, please give us likes, please give us a rating. All that stuff is so helpful. And it's the stuff we track like the most. So again, if you can do that for us, that'd be amazing. Again, shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks at 4th and South. And also, you can find their food on DoorDash and Public Summit Adjusters at 215-752-0560. Go to them for all your adjusting needs. Okay, again, you guys are awesome. We're excited. We'll see what happens with the trade deadline. If we need to do another emergency podcast, we will, though we thought we were going to, but who knows now with, everything kind of happening early. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, we'll be here for all of it. And again, we go through the off season too. So even when the Flyers are done, we're still doing podcasts. So we love you guys. And remember, always stay gritty.